At the center of this tragic tale were two individuals whose paths had crossed years earlier, only to collide again with devastating consequences. David Reeves, a 32-year-old software engineer, and Cassandra Cassie Pitt, a 30-year-old marketing executive, had once been lovers. Their romance, which had burned bright and fierce, ended in heartbreak and resentment. Neither could have imagined that a chance reconnection through a dating app would reignite a spark, not of love, but of deadly obsession. David Reeves was born on a sweltering summer day in 1991. From an early age, it was clear that David was gifted with an exceptional intellect. His parents, both academics at the University of Chicago, nurtured his curiosity and pushed him to excel in his studies. Growing up, David was surrounded by books and intellectual discourse. While this environment fostered his academic growth, it did little to develop his emotional intelligence or social skills. As a child, David often struggled to connect with his peers, finding solace instead in the logical world of mathematics and computer programming. At school, David's brilliance was evident, but so was his inability to navigate social situations. He was often the target of bullies, which only served to deepen his isolation and fuel a simmering resentment towards those he perceived as more socially adept. Despite these challenges, David's academic performance remained stellar, and he graduated as valedictorian of his high school class. David's exceptional grades and test scores earned him a full scholarship to the Institute of Technology, where he pursued a degree in computer science. It was during his college years that David began to come out of his shell, albeit slowly. He joined the robotics club and found a group of like-minded individuals who appreciated his intellect and quirky sense of humor. After graduating from MIT, David landed a prestigious position at a tech startup. His innovative ideas and tireless work ethic quickly propelled him up the corporate ladder. By the age of 28, he was leading his own team of developers, working on projects that promised to revolutionize the field of artificial intelligence. Despite his professional success, David's personal life remained a source of frustration and disappointment. His relationships were few and far between, often ending abruptly due to his intense nature and difficulty in expressing emotions. David's therapist, whom he began seeing in his late 20s, suggested that he might have undiagnosed high-functioning autism, which could explain his social struggles and intense focus on specific interests. As David entered his early 30s, he found himself increasingly lonely and unfulfilled. His parents, now retired and traveling the world, were largely absent from his life. Colleagues admired his brilliance, but kept their distance socially. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that David would encounter Cassandra Pitt, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of both their lives. Cassandra Pitt's story began in the bustling city of Atlanta, Georgia, where she was born in 1993 to Elaine, a high school English teacher, and Desmond, a civil rights attorney. The youngest of three children, Cassie grew up in a household that valued education, social justice, and self-expression. From an early age, Cassie exhibited a natural charisma and an ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Her infectious laugh and quick wit made her popular among her peers, while her sharp intellect and curiosity endeared her to her teachers. Cassie's childhood was marked by a sense of adventure and a desire to experience all that life had to offer. Despite her outgoing nature, Cassie harbored a deep-seated insecurity about living up to her family's expectations. Her older siblings, both high achievers in their respective fields of medicine and law, cast long shadows. Cassie's passion for communication led her to pursue a degree in marketing and public relations. College life suited Cassie perfectly, allowing her to expand her horizons and explore new ideas. It was during her junior year that Cassie first began to question her sexuality. A close friendship with her roommate Valerie blossomed into a romantic relationship, leading Cassie to identify as bisexual. While her family was supportive, this period of self-discovery was not without its challenges, as Cassie navigated the complexities of her identity in the face of societal expectations. After graduation, Cassie's drive and talent landed her a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. She threw herself into her work, quickly gaining a reputation as a creative problem solver and a skilled communicator. Her career flourished, and by the age of 28, she had been promoted to a senior executive position, overseeing major accounts for national brands. As she approached her 30th birthday, Cassie felt a mix of pride in her accomplishments and a gnawing sense that something was missing from her life. It was in this state of introspection that fate would bring David Reeves into her orbit, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The paths of David Reeves and Cassandra Pitt first crossed on a chilly October evening at a tech industry networking event in downtown Chicago. David, there to represent his company's latest AI innovations, found himself drawn to the vibrant energy emanating from the marketing corner of the room. It was there that he first laid eyes on Cassie, who was captivating a small crowd with her animated description of a recent successful campaign. Intrigued by her eloquence and charm, David mustered the courage to approach Cassie after her presentation. Their initial conversation was a blend of awkward pauses and unexpected connections. Cassie was impressed by David's depth of knowledge and unique perspectives, while David was captivated by Cassie's ability to make complex concepts accessible and engaging. Exchanging contact information, they parted ways that evening with a sense of potential hanging in the air. Over the next few weeks, their communication evolved from sporadic professional emails to daily text exchanges filled with witty banter and shared interests. Their first date, a visit to the Art Institute of Chicago, was a study in contrasts. David's meticulous analysis of brushstrokes and historical context was balanced by Cassie's emotional responses to the art and her ability to weave narratives around each piece. Despite their different approaches, both found the experience enriching, and the spark between them grew stronger. As their relationship developed, David and Cassie seemed to complement each other in unexpected ways. Cassie drew David out of his shell, encouraging him to experience life beyond the confines of his work and routines. In turn, David's steadiness and intellectual depth provided Cassie with a sense of grounding she hadn't realized she was missing. However, as the initial glow of romance began to fade, the fundamental differences in their personalities became more pronounced. David's need for structure and predictability often clashed with Cassie's spontaneity and social nature. Arguments became more frequent, with David's difficulty in expressing emotions and Cassie's frustration with his perceived emotional distance, creating a widening rift between them. The breaking point came 8 months into their relationship when Cassie was offered a promotion that would require extensive travel. David, unable to cope with the idea of long distance and change, retreated into himself. His behavior became increasingly possessive and demanding, attempting to control aspects of Cassie's life in a misguided effort to keep her close. Feeling suffocated and recognizing the unhealthy patterns in their relationship, Cassie made the difficult decision to end things. The breakup was messy and emotionally charged. David, unable to process the rejection, alternated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with hurtful accusations. In the aftermath, Cassie threw herself into her new role, using work as a buffer against the emotional fallout. David, on the other hand, spiraled into a deep depression, his work suffering as he obsessed over what went wrong and how he could win Cassie back. As weeks turned into months, their lives diverged. Cassie began to heal and move forward, while David remained stuck in a loop of anger, self-pity, and fantasies of reconciliation. Neither could have predicted that their paths would cross again, or the tragic consequences that would follow when they did. The 3 years following David and Cassie's breakup saw their lives take dramatically different trajectories. Cassie, embracing her new role and the opportunities it presented, threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. Her career flourished as she spearheaded innovative marketing campaigns that garnered industry recognition. She traveled extensively, broadening her horizons and forging new connections both professionally and personally. During this time, Cassie explored her identity further, engaging in a series of relationships that helped her better understand her needs and desires. She dated both men and women, each experience teaching her more about herself and what she truly wanted in a partner. Through therapy and self-reflection, Cassie worked on setting healthier boundaries and communicating her needs more effectively. David, in stark contrast, struggled to move past the breakup. His work, once his primary source of pride and fulfillment, began to suffer as he grappled with depression and obsessive thoughts about Cassie. Colleagues noticed his declining performance and erratic behavior, leading to a series of warnings from his superiors. In an attempt to fill the void left by Cassie, David tried dating again, but each attempt ended in disappointment. He found himself constantly comparing these women to Cassie, always finding them lacking. His therapist encouraged him to focus on personal growth and healing, but David's sessions often devolved into ruminations about his past relationship and fantasies of reconciliation. As time passed, David's obsession with Cassie didn't wane, but instead took on a darker tone. He began monitoring her social media accounts religiously, creating elaborate stories in his mind about her life and the reasons for their breakup. Unbeknownst to Cassie, David had started driving by her apartment and favorite haunts, always careful to remain undetected. Both David and Cassie continued to live, their paths occasionally crossing at local establishments. These brief, awkward encounters only served to fuel David's obsession and reinforce Cassie's decision to end the relationship. Neither could have foreseen how a simple swipe on a dating app would soon shatter the fragile peace of their separate lives. On a quiet Sunday evening in September, David found himself mindlessly scrolling through a popular dating app. His therapist had suggested he try to meet new people, but David's heart wasn't in it. He was using the app when a familiar face caught his eye. There, smiling back at him from the screen, was Cassie. David's heart raced as he stared at her profile. The photos were recent, showing Cassie at various events and travels. Her bio was witty and confident, highlighting her love for adventure and passion for her work. Without hesitation, David swiped right, his mind already spinning with possibilities. To his shock and elation, it was a match. Cassie had swiped right on him too, though her reasons were far different from David's. For Cassie, seeing David's profile had been a surprise, but she had swiped right out of a mixture of curiosity and a desire for closure. She hoped that enough time had passed for them to have a mature conversation, and perhaps even forge a friendship. David wasted no time in sending a message. "Hey Cassie, long time no see." His casual tone belied the trembling of his hands as he typed. Cassie's response came the next day. "Hi David, this is a surprise. I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?" Their initial exchange was polite but guarded. David, interpreting Cassie's responses through the lens of his fantasies, saw signs of lingering affection where there were none. He quickly steered the conversation towards meeting up, suggesting they grab coffee to catch up properly. Cassie, sensing David's eagerness, felt a twinge of unease. She gently deflected, saying she was busy with work, but suggesting they could chat more on the app for now. Over the next few days, their conversations continued sporadically. David became increasingly bold, reminiscing about their past and hinting at his desire to rekindle their relationship. Cassie, growing uncomfortable with the direction of their chats, decided to be direct. In a carefully worded message, Cassie explained that while she valued the good times they had shared, she wasn't interested in revisiting their romantic relationship. She expressed hope that they could be friends, but made it clear that anything more was off the table. For David, Cassie's rejection was like a physical blow. All the progress he thought he had made in therapy crumbled in an instant. As he read and reread her message, his sadness quickly turned to anger. The old feelings of betrayal and resentment resurfaced with a vengeance, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. In the days following Cassie's rejection, David's mental state rapidly deteriorated. The carefully constructed facade of normalcy he had maintained over the past 3 years crumbled, revealing the depths of his obsession and instability. He called in sick to work, isolating himself in his apartment, which quickly became a reflection of his chaotic mind. He created elaborate timelines and conspiracy-style stringboards, trying to piece together the real reason Cassie had rejected him. In his delusional state, David convinced himself that Cassie was being manipulated by others, that she couldn't possibly have rejected him of her own free will. His online behavior became increasingly erratic. David created multiple fake profiles on various social media platforms, using them to interact with Cassie and gather more information about her life. He spent hours analyzing her posts, likes, and comments, looking for hidden messages he believed were meant for him. David's obsession soon spilled over into the physical world. He began following Cassie, carefully documenting her daily routines, the places she frequented, and the people she interacted with. He was meticulous in his stalking, always staying just out of sight, convinced that if he could just understand her life fully, he would find the key to winning her back. As weeks passed, David's grip on reality continued to slip. He stopped attending therapy, convinced that his therapist was part of the conspiracy to keep him and Cassie apart. His personal hygiene and living conditions deteriorated, but he barely noticed, so consumed was he by his obsession. David's work suffered severely. When he did show up at the office, his behavior was erratic and his performance subpar. Concerned colleagues tried to reach out, but David pushed them away, growing paranoid that they too were working against him. It wasn't long before he was called into a meeting with HR and placed on indefinite leave, pending a psychological evaluation. This professional setback only served to fuel David's delusions. With no job to distract him, he devoted all his time and energy to his obsession with Cassie. He convinced himself that if he could just talk to her face to face, he could make her understand that they were meant to be together. David's planning became more sinister. He purchased a gun through an illegal online marketplace, justifying it to himself as protection against the imagined forces keeping him and Cassie apart. He spent hours practicing what he would say to Cassie, rehearsing scenarios that always ended with her realizing her mistake and falling back into his arms. As his mental state deteriorated further, David's fantasies took on a darker tone. He began to entertain thoughts of forcing Cassie to listen to him, of making her understand their connection by any means necessary. The line between love and obsession blurred completely in his mind, replaced by a singular all-consuming need to possess Cassie. On a crisp autumn morning, David woke with a sense of clarity that had eluded him for weeks. He showered, shaved, and dressed with care, as if preparing for a long-awaited date. In his twisted mind, this was to be the day when everything would finally be set right. With the gun tucked into his waistband and a bouquet of roses in his hand, David set out to confront the object of his obsession, oblivious to the tragedy he was about to unleash. The morning of October 15th, Cassie Pitt began her day as she always did, with a brisk jog through the neighborhood, followed by a cup of coffee on her balcony. She had no way of knowing that just a few blocks away, David Reeves was watching her through binoculars, waiting for the right moment to make his move. As Cassie prepared to leave for work, David made his way to her apartment building. His heart raced with anticipation, the weight of the gun at his waist a constant reminder of the power he now held. He positioned himself near the entrance, the bouquet of roses clutched tightly in his trembling hands. When Cassie emerged from the building, David called out her name. She froze, recognizing his voice instantly. As she turned to face him, a mix of surprise and fear flashed across her features. "David, what are you doing here?" David's rehearsed speech abandoned him at the sight of Cassie. Instead, he thrust the roses toward her, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Cassie, please, we need to talk. I know you didn't mean what you said. We belong together." Cassie's initial shock quickly gave way to anger. She took a step back, her voice firm as she replied, "David, I meant every word. You need to leave." But David was beyond reason. He advanced towards Cassie, his free hand reaching for her arm. "You don't understand. They've been lying to you, manipulating you. I'm the only one who truly loves you." Cassie's training in self-defense kicked in. She twisted away from David's grasp, her voice rising as she shouted for help and calling the police. The mention of the police shattered the last of David's delusions. In a fluid motion born of desperation, he pulled the gun from his waistband. The roses fell forgotten to the ground as he leveled the weapon at Cassie. Cassie's eyes widened in terror at the sight of the gun. She raised her hands in a placating gesture, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. For a moment, David hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed his face as he stared into Cassie's pleading eyes. But then he caught sight of her phone in her hand, the screen showing a half-dialed 911 call. Something snapped inside him. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. David lunged forward, grabbing for the phone. Cassie resisted, struggling to break free. In the scuffle, a shot rang out, echoing through the quiet morning air. Time seemed to stand still as Cassie stumbled backward, a look of shock and disbelief on her face. She looked down at the spreading red stain on her blouse. David stood frozen, the gun still clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. As Cassie collapsed to the ground, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. David, panicking, turned and fled, leaving behind the woman he claimed to love bleeding on the sidewalk. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing second. But for Cassie, lying on the cold concrete, those sirens would come too late. The tranquil morning was shattered by the arrival of police cars and ambulances, their sirens piercing the air as they converged on Cassie's house. Detective Eliana Vasquez, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, arrived on the scene within minutes of the first 911 call. As paramedics fought to save Cassie's life, Detective Vasquez began the painstaking process of piecing together the events of the morning. She cordoned off the area, preserving the crime scene for the forensics team. The discarded roses, the shell casing from the fired bullet, and the blood-stained concrete all told a partial story of the tragedy that had unfolded. Witnesses were quickly identified and separated for interviews. A resident of the building had been watering her plants on her balcony when she heard the commotion. She described seeing a man matching David's description fleeing the scene, providing the first solid lead in the case. As the forensics team combed the area for evidence, Detective Vasquez turned her attention to Cassie's background. A preliminary search of Cassie's phone, retrieved from the scene, revealed the recent interactions with David on the dating app. This discovery quickly established David as the prime suspect. The investigation expanded rapidly. Detectives were dispatched to David's apartment and workplace, while others began the process of tracing his movements in the days leading up to the shooting. His recent leave of absence from work and erratic behavior painted a picture of a man unraveling. Interviews with Cassie's friends and colleagues revealed the history between her and David, shedding light on the toxic nature of their past relationship and David's inability to move on. Each new piece of information added to the growing profile of David as a dangerous and unstable individual. The search for David quickly escalated into an intense manhunt. As dawn broke on the second day after the shooting, law enforcement agencies from across the state joined the effort, transforming the quiet suburb into a hive of police activity. As the manhunt entered its third day, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A homeless man reported seeing someone matching David's description entering an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The tip was initially met with skepticism, but given the lack of other leads, Detective Vasquez decided to pursue it. A tactical team was assembled, and in the early hours of the morning they moved in on the warehouse. The tension was palpable as they methodically cleared the building, the silence broken only by the crackle of their radios and the echo of their footsteps on the concrete floor. In a dramatic turn of events, David was found, barely recognizable from the man in the widely circulated photos. Disheveled, malnourished, and clearly in a state of mental distress, he offered no resistance as he was taken into custody. Detective Vasquez, bleary-eyed but determined, conducted the initial interrogation. David, still in a state of shock, alternated between periods of eerie calm and emotional outbursts. His ramblings about conspiracies and his delusional belief that he and Cassie were meant to be together painted a disturbing picture of his mental state. Within hours of his arrest, David was assigned a public defender. She immediately requested a psychological evaluation, setting the stage for what would become a central issue in the case: David's mental competency to stand trial. As the legal proceedings unfolded, a team of forensic psychiatrists began the arduous task of evaluating David's mental state. Their findings would be crucial in determining whether he would face trial or be remanded to a psychiatric facility. Meanwhile, the prosecution meticulously gathered evidence from David's apartment, including the walls covered with photos and timelines of Cassie's life. His internet search history revealed a disturbing pattern of stalking behavior and research on untraceable weapons. Pre-trial motions flew back and forth. The defense sought to suppress evidence from David's apartment, arguing it was obtained without proper warrant. The prosecution fought to include David's dating app conversations with Cassie as evidence of premeditation. The verdict in the trial of David Reeves sent shockwaves through the community. Found guilty of first-degree murder but mentally ill, David was sentenced to life in a high-security psychiatric facility, with the possibility of transfer to prison if his mental state improved. In the wake of the trial, the community struggled to heal. The case had exposed the vulnerabilities that existed even in their seemingly idyllic suburb, leading to increased awareness about stalking and domestic violence. Jennifer Ashcroft, a strikingly beautiful 52-year-old woman, had built her fortune in the cutthroat world of biotech. Her company was at the forefront of brain interface technology, and Jennifer was known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding determination. She moved through life with the confidence of someone who always got what she wanted, whether in the boardroom or the bedroom. A 20-year-old Ryan Breslin, with his brooding good looks, seemed an unlikely match for the poised and polished Jennifer. A college dropout with a troubled past, Ryan had drifted through a series of dead-end jobs before a chance encounter with Jennifer changed the trajectory of his life. Their relationship, while unconventional, appeared to offer both parties what they desired. For Jennifer, a vibrant young companion to stave off loneliness, and for Ryan, financial security, and a taste of luxury he had never known. For nearly a year, their arrangement flourished in the shadows of Riverton. But as summer gave way to autumn, a shift in their delicate dynamic would set in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed, leaving the community to grapple with the dark undercurrents that had been flowing beneath its pristine surface all along. Jennifer Ashcroft's path to wealth and power began in the middle-class suburbs of Boston. Born to a high school chemistry teacher and a librarian, young Jennifer showed an early aptitude for science and an insatiable curiosity about the human mind. Her parents, recognizing her potential, scrimped and saved to provide her with every educational opportunity they could afford. At 16, Jennifer's life took a dramatic turn when her science fair project on neurotransmitters caught the eye of a visiting professor from MIT. Impressed by her precocious talent, he became her mentor, guiding her through accelerated studies and into the prestigious neuroscience program at MIT. It was here that Jennifer's ambition truly took flight. During her graduate studies, Jennifer's research into neuroplasticity attracted the attention of several biotech startups. By 25, she had secured her first patent, a fledgling company working on brain-computer interfaces. Under Jennifer's leadership, the company flourished, its stock price soaring as breakthroughs in the technology made headlines. With each success, Jennifer's wealth and influence grew, but so did her reputation for ruthlessness. Former colleagues spoke in hushed tones of her ability to charm and manipulate, to identify weaknesses and exploit them mercilessly. Jennifer's personal life was marked by a series of short-lived marriages, each ending as her partners found themselves unable to compete with her true passion, her work. Her first husband, a fellow researcher she met at MIT, lasted 3 years before filing for divorce, citing emotional neglect. The second, a charming venture capitalist, made it to year 5 before Jennifer's suspicions of his infidelity led to an acrimonious split. After her third divorce at 48, from a younger art dealer who claimed she had become obsessively controlling, Jennifer swore off traditional relationships. Instead, she began to seek out the company of much younger men, drawn to their vitality and the uncomplicated nature of purely transactional arrangements. It was a lifestyle that suited her, allowing her to maintain control while satisfying her needs for companionship and physical intimacy. Yet as Jennifer approached her 50s, a creeping sense of loneliness began to gnaw at her. It was this vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath her polished exterior, that would leave her susceptible to the intoxicating allure of Ryan Breslin and the destructive jealousy that would follow. Ryan Breslin's early life stood in stark contrast to Jennifer's. Born in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, Ryan was the youngest of 4 children in a family perpetually teetering on the edge of poverty. His father, a long-haul trucker with a penchant for alcohol, was rarely home. His mother, overwhelmed and battling depression, struggled to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Ryan learned to fend for himself. Blessed with good looks and natural charm, he discovered early on that these attributes could be leveraged to his advantage. By high school, Ryan had perfected the art of getting by with minimal effort, relying on his charisma to smooth over his academic shortcomings and disciplinary issues. Despite his lackluster academic performance, Ryan's SAT scores were surprisingly high, hinting at an intelligence he rarely applied to his studies. This, combined with his prowess on the basketball court, earned him a scholarship to a small liberal arts college in Philadelphia. However, the freedom of college life proved too tempting for Ryan. Away from the watchful eyes of his family and high school teachers, he fell in with a party crowd. His grades plummeted, and by the end of his freshman year, Ryan had lost his scholarship. Too ashamed to return home, he decided to stay in Philadelphia, bouncing between low-wage jobs and crashing on friends' couches. It was during this aimless period that Ryan's path intersected with Jennifer's. Working as a barista in an upscale cafe frequented by business executives, Ryan caught Jennifer's eye one rainy Tuesday morning. She was struck by his easy smile and the hint of vulnerability behind his confident demeanor. For Ryan, Jennifer represented everything he thought he wanted: sophistication, success, and the promise of a life far removed from his humble beginnings. Their initial flirtation quickly evolved into something more. Jennifer, intrigued by Ryan's raw potential and eager to shape him into her ideal companion, offered him a proposition. She would provide him with financial support, introduce him to her world of luxury and refinement in exchange for his exclusive companionship. For Ryan, faced with mounting debts and dwindling prospects, the offer seemed too good to refuse. Seizing the opportunity, Jennifer invited him as her guest, her tone making it clear that this was more than a casual invitation. The gallery opening marked the beginning of Ryan's induction into Jennifer's world. She arrived at his shabby apartment, presenting him with a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. As they moved through the event, Jennifer expertly guided Ryan, whispering explanations about the art and introducing him to her circles as her young protege. For Ryan, the evening was intoxicating. He found himself easily slipping into the role of the charming, artistic young man, feeding off the approving glances and engaging conversations with Jennifer's peers. As the night wore on, the attraction between them grew palpable, culminating in a passionate encounter back at Jennifer's penthouse. In the afterglow, Jennifer laid out her proposition. She would provide Ryan with a generous monthly allowance, pay for his education if he chose to return to college, and introduce him to opportunities he could only dream of. In return, she expected his companionship, discretion, and exclusivity. Ryan, seeing a chance to reinvent himself and escape his directionless existence, agreed without hesitation. The following months were a whirlwind for Ryan. Jennifer moved him into the guest house on her estate, replacing his wardrobe with designer labels and introducing him to the finer things in life. She enrolled him in art appreciation classes, hired a personal trainer to hone his already impressive physique, and taught him the nuances of wine tasting and fine dining. Jennifer took immense pleasure in molding Ryan, viewing him as both a project and a prized possession. She reveled in the envious glances they received when they attended events together, proudly showing off her attractive young companion. For Ryan, the relationship offered security and excitement in equal measure. He threw himself into his new role with enthusiasm, eager to prove his worth and maintain the lifestyle to which he was quickly becoming accustomed. Their physical relationship was passionate and adventurous, with Jennifer introducing Ryan to experiences he had never imagined. She pushed his boundaries, always maintaining control, a dynamic that spilled over into other aspects of their relationship. As summer turned to fall, Jennifer and Ryan settled into a rhythm of lavish vacations, social events, and intimate evenings at home. To the outside world, they appeared to be an unconventional but happy couple. However, beneath the surface, the seeds of codependency and obsession were taking root, setting the stage for the turmoil that was to come. The delicate balance of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship began to shift with the arrival of Aria Thornton, a 20-year-old art history major at the local university. Aria entered their lives innocuously enough, as a part-time docent at the Museum of Modern Art. Ryan first encountered Aria during one of his frequent visits to the museum, a habit encouraged by Jennifer to further his art education. Aria was leading a tour group, her passion for the artwork evident in her animated descriptions and insightful commentary. Ryan found himself drawn to her enthusiasm, so different from Jennifer's calculated appreciation of art as a status symbol. After the tour, Ryan approached Aria, engaging her in a discussion about the exhibition. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared laughter and a palpable sense of connection. For the first time in months, Ryan felt truly seen for who he was, rather than as an extension of Jennifer. Aria, with her vibrant style and infectious laugh, represented everything that Jennifer was not. Where Jennifer was polished and restrained, Aria was spontaneous and expressive. Her youth and energy resonated with Ryan, reminding him of the pure relationships he had sacrificed for his arrangement with Jennifer. Over the next few weeks, Ryan found himself visiting the museum more frequently, always managing to time his visits with Aria's shifts. Their friendship blossomed quickly, bonding over shared interests in art, music, and philosophy. Aria introduced Ryan to her world of college parties, indie film screenings, and late-night discussions in 24-hour diners. For Ryan, these interactions with Aria and her friends were a breath of fresh air. He rediscovered parts of himself that had been suppressed in his relationship with Jennifer, including his own artistic aspirations. Aria encouraged him to pursue his interest in photography, even gifting him a vintage camera she had found at a flea market. As Ryan spent more time with Arya, he began to question the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. The stark contrast between the genuine connection he felt with Arya and the transactional nature of his arrangement with Jennifer became increasingly apparent. He found himself manufacturing excuses to spend time away from the estate, his thoughts constantly drifting to Arya. Unbeknownst to Ryan, his changing behavior and growing distraction had not gone unnoticed by Jennifer. Her keen instincts, honed by years of corporate maneuvering, sensed a shift in their dynamic. As Ryan pulled away, Jennifer's determination to maintain control over him only intensified, setting the stage for the conflict that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Jennifer noticed Ryan checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain messages. He began to spend more time at the museum, citing a newfound passion for contemporary art. While Jennifer initially encouraged this interest, a nagging suspicion began to take root in her mind. One evening, as they prepared for a charity gala, Jennifer casually asked about Ryan's day at the museum. His response was enthusiastic, filled with details about a new exhibition. But it was the mention of Arya, the incredibly knowledgeable docent, that caught Jennifer's attention. The way Ryan's eyes sparkled as he spoke of her set off alarm bells in Jennifer's head. Determined to uncover the truth, Jennifer began to monitor Ryan more closely. She installed a GPS tracker on his phone under the guise of a security upgrade. She hired a private investigator to follow him during his outings. The reports she received confirmed her worst fears. Ryan was spending considerable time with a young woman, their body language indicating a clear attraction. As evidence of Ryan's growing connection with Arya mounted, Jennifer's jealousy festered. She oscillated between icy detachment and clingy desperation, her moods becoming increasingly unpredictable. One moment she would shower Ryan with expensive gifts. The next, she would subject him to passive-aggressive comments and veiled threats. Jennifer's behavior began to affect her professional life as well. She became distracted during important meetings, snapping at employees for minor infractions. Her assistant noticed an increase in her alcohol consumption, often finding empty wine bottles in her office trash. Unable to contain her suspicions any longer, Jennifer confronted Ryan after a particularly late night out. She demanded to know where he had been, accusing him of betraying her trust. Ryan, caught off guard, attempted to downplay his friendship with Arya, insisting that Jennifer was overreacting. The argument escalated quickly, with Jennifer reminding Ryan of everything she had done for him and insinuating that he owed her his loyalty. This confrontation marked a turning point in their relationship. Ryan, feeling trapped and resentful of Jennifer's possessiveness, began to withdraw further. He became more guarded with his phone, careful not to mention Arya, and invented elaborate excuses for his absences. Jennifer, driven by her growing paranoia, intensified her efforts to control Ryan. She insisted on accompanying him to art events, her possessive body language sending a clear message to anyone who approached them. She surprised him with impromptu visits to the museum, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the young docent who had captured Ryan's attention. As the weeks wore on, the emotional chasm between Jennifer and Ryan widened. Their once passionate encounters became mechanical, tinged with an undercurrent of resentment. Jennifer's jealousy morphed into an obsession, consuming her thoughts and driving her to increasingly desperate measures to keep Ryan by her side. Little did she know that her possessive love was pushing Ryan further away, steering them both towards a confrontation that would have fatal consequences. As Jennifer's jealousy intensified, she embarked on a calculated campaign to maintain control over Ryan. Drawing on the same strategic thinking that had made her a formidable businesswoman, she deployed a range of manipulation tactics designed to keep Ryan dependent on her and isolated from Arya's influence. Jennifer's first move was to exploit Ryan's financial dependence. She began to withhold his allowance, citing fictitious issues with her accounts or claiming she needed to reallocate funds for business purposes. When Ryan expressed concern, she would relent, but not before extracting promises of increased commitment and time spent together. Emotional manipulation became Jennifer's primary weapon. She oscillated between lavishing Ryan with affection and subjecting him to prolonged periods of icy silence. This hot and cold treatment left Ryan constantly off balance, never sure where he stood. Jennifer also employed more subtle tactics to isolate Ryan from potential support systems. She scheduled trips that conveniently coincided with plans Ryan had made with friends. She expressed concern about his old acquaintances, implying they were a bad influence or simply using him for his newfound status. Gradually, Ryan's social circle shrank, leaving Jennifer as his primary source of companionship and validation. In moments of perceived threat, Jennifer would remind Ryan of all she had done for him, framing her controlling behavior as acts of love and generosity. She'd recount how she had rescued him from a life of poverty and obscurity, implying that without her, he would be nothing. These guilt trips served to reinforce Ryan's sense of obligation and indebtedness to Jennifer. As Ryan continued to pull out, Jennifer's tactics grew more desperate. She began to fake health scares, claiming stress-induced migraines or fainting spells that mysteriously coincided with times Ryan wanted to go out alone. Her performance was so convincing that Ryan often canceled his plans out of genuine concern for her well-being. Through this web of manipulation, Jennifer sought to create a reality where Ryan believed he needed her, where his autonomy was slowly eroded until staying with her seemed like the only viable option. Yet, with each manipulative act, she was pushing Ryan closer to his breaking point, fueling a resentment that would soon boil over with devastating consequences. During one of her clandestine investigations into Ryan's past, Jennifer uncovered a secret that she believed would give her the ultimate leverage. Through her network of private investigators, she learned that Ryan had been involved in a car accident during his freshman year of college. The accident had resulted in a serious injury to another student, but Ryan had fled the scene in a panic. The case had gone cold due to lack of evidence, but Jennifer now held the missing pieces. Armed with this explosive information, Jennifer carefully planned her approach. She waited for a moment when Ryan was particularly vulnerable, after a heated argument about his increasing absences. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer calmly mentioned the accident. The color drained from Ryan's face as he slowly turned back to her. Jennifer laid out the facts with cold precision, producing police reports. She made it clear that she possessed enough evidence to reopen the case and implicate Ryan. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. If Ryan didn't comply with her wishes, she would turn the information over to the authorities. The revelation shattered Ryan. The accident had been the catalyst for his downward spiral in college, the guilt eating away at him for years. He had convinced himself that by leaving his old life behind, he could escape his past. Now that illusion was cruelly stripped away. Jennifer pressed her advantage, presenting Ryan with a choice. He could recommit to their relationship, cut all ties with Arya, and follow Jennifer's rules to the letter. Or she would expose his secret, ruining his life and possibly sending him to prison. Trapped and desperate, Ryan initially agreed to Jennifer's demands. He stopped visiting the museum, ignored Arya's increasingly worried messages, and became a virtual prisoner in Jennifer's gilded cage. Jennifer reveled in her victory, believing she had finally secured Ryan's unwavering loyalty. However, the weight of the blackmail soon began to take its toll on both of them. Ryan became withdrawn and depressed, his once vibrant personality dulled by the constant stress of living under threat. He went through the motions of their relationship, but the spark that had initially drawn Jennifer to him was extinguished. Jennifer, for her part, found that her victory left her feeling hollow. The passionate, challenging young man she had fallen for was replaced by a submissive shell. She vacillated between guilt over her actions and frustration at Ryan's listlessness. As weeks passed, the tension in the household became unbearable. Ryan's resentment simmered just below the surface, while Jennifer's paranoia grew. She became convinced that Ryan was plotting against her, looking for a way to neutralize her leverage. The situation was untenable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark would come in the form of a chance encounter that would push Ryan to his limits and set in motion the final fatal confrontation between him and Jennifer. The catalyst for the final confrontation came on a crisp autumn evening. Jennifer had dragged Ryan to a gallery opening, parading him before her peers like a prized possession. As they moved through the crowd, Ryan's eyes locked with a familiar face across the room. It was Arya, looking striking in a vintage dress, her presence a stark reminder of the freedom and genuine connection he had lost. Before Jennifer could react, Ryan mumbled an excuse and fled the gallery. He found himself wandering the streets, his mind racing. The chance encounter with Arya had awakened something in him, a fierce desire for freedom, a reminder of the person he once was and could be again. When Ryan finally returned to the estate in the early hours of the morning, he found Jennifer waiting for him, her face a mask of cold fury. The argument that ensued was unlike any they had before. Ryan, emboldened by his realization and no longer willing to be controlled, confronted Jennifer about her manipulation and blackmail. Jennifer, sensing she was losing her grip on Ryan, resorted to her final play. She reminded him of the evidence she held, threatening not only to expose his past, but to use her influence to destroy any future he might hope to have. She painted a vivid picture of the ruin that awaited him if he dared to leave her. But instead of cowing Ryan, her threats only served to strengthen his resolve. In a moment of clarity, he realized that no future with Jennifer, no matter how luxurious, was worth the price of his soul. With a calmness that belied the turmoil within him, Ryan told Jennifer that he was leaving, regardless of the consequences. Jennifer, faced with the reality of losing Ryan despite her best efforts, snapped. What happened next would shock the community and change both their lives forever. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer's composure shattered completely. With a primal scream of rage and desperation, she lunged at him, her manicured nails raking across his face. Ryan, caught off guard by the sudden violence, stumbled backward, knocking over an antique vase that shattered on the marble floor. The sound of breaking porcelain seemed to push Jennifer further into a frenzy. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart and swung it at Ryan's head. He ducked, the decanter missing him by inches and smashing against the wall, showering them both with glass and expensive scotch. Ryan, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to restrain Jennifer, pleading with her to calm down. But Jennifer was beyond reason. She clawed at him, kicking and screaming incoherently about betrayal and ingratitude. In the struggle, they careened into Jennifer's prized art collection, paintings crashing to the floor around them. As they grappled, Jennifer's hand closed around a letter opener on her desk, a wicked ornate thing that was more weapon than office tool. She plunged it toward Ryan's chest. He managed to deflect the blow, but the blade sliced deeply into his arm, drawing a spray of blood. The sight of blood seemed to momentarily snap Jennifer back to reality. She staggered back, the letter opener falling from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Ryan, clutching his bleeding arm, saw an opportunity to escape and made a dash for the door. But Jennifer, in a final desperate act, grabbed his injured arm, yanking him back with surprising strength. Ryan, acting on pure instinct and adrenaline, shoved her away hard. Jennifer stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her head striking the corner of the heavy marble fireplace with a sickening crack. Jennifer crumpled to the floor, a pool of blood quickly spreading beneath her hair. Ryan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The room, so recently a scene of chaos, was suddenly terribly still. With trembling hands, Ryan checked for a pulse, finding none. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Jennifer was dead, and his life as he knew it was over. In a daze, he stumbled out of the house into the cool night air, leaving behind a scene of destruction that would soon become the center of a sensational investigation. The grisly discovery was made by Jennifer's housekeeper, Elodia Ramirez, early the next morning. Her screams upon finding her employer's lifeless body shattered the tranquil morning silence of Riverton, bringing neighbors running and prompting a flurry of calls to 911. Detective Lydia Blackwell, a veteran of the Riverton Police Department's Homicide Division, arrived at the scene within the hour. The opulent living room, now a tableau of violence, told a story of a fierce struggle. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she made her initial survey, noting the overturned furniture, shattered artifacts, and the smears of blood that led to Jennifer's body by the fireplace. As crime scene technicians swarmed the house, Detective Blackwell began piecing together the events of a previous night. Security camera footage showed Ryan fleeing the premises in the early hours of the morning, his shirt stained with blood. His swift disappearance made him the prime suspect, and an all-points bulletin was issued for his arrest. As the investigation progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with staff and acquaintances revealed the tumultuous nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship. Several witnesses reported hearing frequent arguments and expressed concern about Jennifer's increasingly erratic behavior. A breakthrough came when detectives discovered Jennifer's hidden files detailing her investigation into Ryan's past. The evidence of blackmail added a new dimension to the case, suggesting that Ryan might have been acting in desperation rather than cold-blooded murder. Meanwhile, Ryan remained at large. Sightings were reported across the state, but he managed to elude capture. The turning point in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Aria Thornton, racked with guilt over her role in the events, came forward with crucial information. She provided investigators with text messages and voicemails from Ryan, documenting Jennifer's escalating behavior and his growing fear. Aria's testimony painted a picture of Ryan as a victim of manipulation and abuse, trapped in a gilded cage by Jennifer's wealth and threats. This new perspective prompted Detective Blackwell to dig deeper into Jennifer's past, uncovering a pattern of obsessive behavior and allegations of stalking from her previous relationships. Forensic evidence from the crime scene began to corroborate Ryan's version of events. The angle of Jennifer's fatal injury was consistent with an accidental fall, and defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had been the aggressor in the final confrontation. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Jennifer's own digital footprint. A thorough examination of her computers revealed the full extent of her surveillance of Ryan, including GPS tracking data and recordings from hidden cameras in their home. The level of invasion and control shocked even the most seasoned investigators. As the true nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship came to light, public opinion began to shift. The narrative of the gold-digging boy toy gave way to a more nuanced understanding of a young man trapped in an abusive situation. Initially charged with second-degree murder, Ryan's case took an unexpected turn. As evidence of Jennifer's manipulation and abuse mounted, the district attorney's office faced increasing pressure to reconsider the charges. After lengthy deliberations and negotiations with Ryan's defense team, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. After weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Ryan was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, a verdict that acknowledged his role in Jennifer's death, while also recognizing the extenuating circumstances that led to the fatal confrontation. The judge, taking into account Ryan's lack of prior criminal record and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others arguing that Ryan had already suffered enough. At the heart of this tale are 3 individuals whose paths would become inextricably intertwined. Alton Rhodes, the 19-year-old young man whose charm would prove both irresistible and destructive. Mandy Carell, a neglected wife yearning for passion. M. Delilah Frost, a recent divorcee seeking to reclaim her sense of self. Their story would ultimately lead to a shocking act of violence that would forever change the face of the community, leaving its residents to question how well they truly knew their neighbors. At just 19, Alton Rhodes exuded a confidence and maturity that belied his years. Standing at 6 feet tall, he turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that drew people in. Alton possessed a magnetic personality that made everyone feel special in his presence. Raised by a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse, Alton had learned early on to fend for himself. He'd developed a knack for reading people, understanding their needs and desires sometimes before they did themselves. This skill served him well in his part-time job as a barista at the local coffee shop, where he quickly became a favorite among the regulars. Alton had moved to Redwood just a month after graduating high school, eager to strike out on his own. His mother had reconnected with an old friend in the area who offered Alton the place to stay while he figured out his next steps. He had vague plans of attending community college, but for now he was content to work and enjoy his newfound freedom. The young man's arrival in the neighborhood didn't go unnoticed. Women of all ages found excuses to visit the coffee shop during his shifts, while men grudgingly admired his easy charm. Alton took it all in stride, flashing his dimpled smile and engaging in friendly banter with everyone who crossed his path. But it was his encounters with his immediate neighbors that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. On one side of his temporary home lived the Carells, an outwardly perfect couple whose carefully maintained image hid a crumbling marriage. On the other side resided Delilah Frost, a woman in her early 40s struggling to rebuild her life after a bitter divorce. Alton's first meeting with Mandy Carell occurred on a sunny Saturday morning as he was mowing the lawn. She had come over to welcome him to the neighborhood, bearing a plate of homemade cookies. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Little did either of them know that this innocent encounter would be the first step down a dangerous path. Mandy Carell appeared to have it all: a successful husband, a beautiful home, and the envy of her peers. But behind closed doors, her life was far from perfect. Married for 15 years to Gregory, a prominent surgeon, Mandy had slowly watched the passion and intimacy drain from their relationship. Mandy had once been vivacious and ambitious, with dreams of becoming a renowned artist. However, as Gregory's career flourished, she found herself relegated to the role of trophy wife, expected to maintain their home and social status while her own aspirations withered. Her paintings, once filled with vibrant colors and raw emotion, now gathered dust in a forgotten corner of their basement. The first time Mandy laid eyes on Alton, she felt a spark she thought had long since died. His youthful energy and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings awakened something within her. She found herself making excuses to be outside when he was around, carefully selecting her outfits and rediscovering her makeup collection. Their interaction started innocently enough. Mandy would bring over baked goods or offer gardening advice, lingering longer each time to chat. Alton, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in her life and experiences. He asked about her artwork, and his enthusiasm rekindled her passion for painting. One evening, as Gregory was working late yet again, Mandy invited Alton over to see her old paintings. As they stood in the dim light of the basement, surrounded by canvases that told the story of her faded dreams, something shifted between them. Alton's hand brushed against hers, and Mandy felt a jolt of electricity course through her body. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Alton's eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. In that moment, all the years of neglect and loneliness culminated in a desperate need for connection. Mandy leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that would change everything. As she pulled away, breathless and conflicted, Mandy knew she was standing on the precipice of a decision that could unravel her entire life. But the fire that Alton had ignited within her was too strong to ignore. For the first time in years, she felt alive, desired, and seen. At 42 years old, Delilah Frost was starting over. After 20 years of marriage, she had finally found the courage to leave her emotionally abusive husband. The divorce had been finalized just 3 months before Alton moved in next door, leaving Delilah raw and vulnerable. Once a confident and outgoing woman, years of criticism and manipulation had eroded Delilah's self-esteem. She second-guessed every decision, from her choice of clothing to her career moves. The divorce had drained her financially and emotionally, forcing her to downsize from the lavish home she once shared with her ex-husband to the modest house in Redwood. Delilah's first encounter with Alton came on a rainy afternoon when she was struggling to carry groceries from her car. Without hesitation, he rushed over to help, flashing a warm smile that made her feel seen for the first time in years. As they chatted while putting away her groceries, Delilah found herself opening up about her recent divorce and the challenges of rebuilding her life. To her surprise, Alton listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement and support. His youthful optimism was infectious, and Delilah found herself smiling more than she had in months. Before he left, Alton suggested they have coffee sometime, an invitation that both thrilled and terrified her. In the days that followed, Delilah found herself looking forward to their casual encounters. She began taking evening walks, timing them to coincide with Alton's return from work. They would often stop to chat, and Delilah relished the way Alton made her feel, not as a broken middle-aged divorcee but as a woman with value and appeal. Their friendship deepened quickly. Alton showed genuine interest in Delilah's work as a freelance graphic designer, even offering to help her build a website to attract more clients. His belief in her abilities reignited her passion for her career, and she found herself taking on new projects with renewed confidence. One night, as they sat on Delilah's porch sharing a bottle of wine, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Alton's hand brushed against hers, and Delilah felt a rush of desire she thought she'd never experience again. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't hesitate. In that moment, all her doubts and insecurities melted away, replaced by a burning need to feel alive and wanted once more. As summer gave way to fall, Alton found himself entangled in 2 passionate affairs, each filling a different void in his life. With Mandy, he experienced a depth of emotion and intellectual connection he had never known before. Their clandestine meetings were filled with intense discussions about art, life, and dreams, interspersed with moments of fiery passion. Mandy's neglected talents flourished under Alton's admiration, and she began painting again with renewed vigor. Delilah, on the other hand, offered Alton a sense of nurturing and stability he had always craved. Their time together was marked by comfort and easy laughter, with Delilah's confidence growing stronger with each encounter. Alton found himself playing the role of supportive partner, encouraging her career ambitions and helping her rediscover her self-worth. The young man rationalized his behavior, convincing himself that he was helping both women find happiness and fulfillment. He skillfully juggled his time between them, using his job at the coffee shop and fictitious study groups as covers for his rendezvous. Mandy reveled in the secret thrill of her affair, feeling more alive than she had in years. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of abstract paintings that pulsed with newfound passion and energy. Her renewed zest for life didn't go unnoticed by her husband, Gregory, who attributed the change to a new fitness routine Mandy had ostensibly started. Meanwhile, Delilah blossomed under Alton's attention. Her wardrobe underwent a transformation, reflecting her growing confidence. Friends remarked on the positive change in her demeanor, assuming she had finally moved on from her painful divorce. As weeks turned into months, both women grew increasingly attached to Alton. Mandy began to fantasize about leaving her loveless marriage, imagining a future where she could pursue her art freely with Alton by her side. Delilah, having experienced the pain of a failed marriage, was more cautious but couldn't help dreaming of a fresh start with someone who truly appreciated her. Alton, for his part, became more deeply enmeshed in the web of deceit he had woven. He cared for both women and found himself unable to choose between them. The excitement of his double life began to wear thin, replaced by a constant state of anxiety and guilt. One crisp autumn evening, as Alton lay in Mandy's arms in the secret studio she had set up in her basement, she whispered words that sent a chill down his spine. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Later that same night, in Delilah's warm kitchen, she gazed at him over a cup of tea and confessed that he made her believe in love again. As Alton walked home in the dark, the weight of his actions finally began to sink in. He realized that what had started as harmless flirtation had grown into something far more complex and potentially destructive. Little did he know, the delicate balance he had been maintaining was about to come crashing down, with consequences more dire than he could have ever imagined. As autumn progressed, Alton's double life became increasingly difficult to maintain. The thrill of secret rendezvous was replaced by a constant state of anxiety and hypervigilance. Every text message, every phone call, every casual encounter in the neighborhood became a potential minefield that could expose his deception. Alton developed an elaborate system of alibis and excuses. He cited increased hours at the coffee shop, fictitious study groups for classes he wasn't taking, and non-existent volunteer work to account for his time. His phone became a source of both connection and dread, carefully managed with separate conversations and meticulously deleted message threads. The pressure began to take its toll on Alton, and his once easy smile became strained. Co-workers at the coffee shop noticed his distraction, attributing it to the stress of balancing work and school. In reality, Alton spent every moment terrified that his carefully constructed house of cards would come tumbling down. There were close calls that left Alton's heart racing. One afternoon, he was walking hand in hand with Delilah in a nearby park when he spotted Mandy in the distance. He quickly steered Delilah in the opposite direction, inventing a sudden craving for ice cream to explain their abrupt change of course. Another time, Alton was helping Mandy carry groceries into her house when Delilah drove by. He ducked behind Mandy's car, pretending to tie his shoe, praying that Delilah hadn't noticed him. The incident left him shaken, realizing how easily his deception could be exposed. As Mandy and Delilah grew more attached, they began to demand more of Alton's time and attention. Mandy, emboldened by her rediscovered passion for art and life, started to talk about leaving her husband. She painted vivid pictures of a future with Alton, filled with love and creative pursuits. These conversations left Alton simultaneously exhilarated and terrified, unsure of how to respond to such earnest declarations, given their age differences. Delilah, while more cautious about jumping into a serious relationship, began to integrate Alton into her life in subtle ways. She introduced him to her friends as her young neighbor, but the affectionate glances and inside jokes they shared spoke volumes. She started making plans for the holidays, hinting at wanting Alton to meet her family. The women's growing expectations added another layer of complexity to Alton's already precarious situation. He found himself making conflicting promises, agreeing to holiday plans with both women, and knowing he would inevitably disappoint one or both of them. As the pressure mounted, Alton's guilt began to manifest physically. He lost weight, his sleep was plagued by nightmares, and he developed a nervous tic, constantly checking his phone and glancing over his shoulder. He knew he needed to end at least one of the affairs, but the thought of hurting either woman was unbearable. What Alton failed to realize was that his increasingly erratic behavior was not going unnoticed. Both Mandy and Delilah, initially blinded by their feelings for him, were beginning to sense that something was amiss. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the delicate balance Alton had been struggling to maintain. The facade Alton had so carefully constructed came crashing down on a chilly November evening. The annual festival was in full swing, with residents gathering in the town square for food, games, and live music. Alton had agonized over whether to attend, knowing both Mandy and Delilah would be there. In the end, he decided that his absence would be more suspicious than his presence. As Alton navigated through the crowd, he felt like walking on a tightrope. He exchanged pleasant greetings with neighbors, all the while scanning the area for signs of Mandy or Delilah. He had just begun to relax, thinking he might make it through the evening unscathed, when disaster struck. Mandy, who had been volunteering at the face-painting booth, spotted Alton and waved him over enthusiastically. As he reluctantly approached, he saw Delilah at a nearby table, arranging items for the silent auction. Time seemed to slow down as Alton watched the two women, oblivious to each other's significance, moving towards an inevitable collision. Mandy reached Alton first, greeting him with a warm hug that lingered a bit too long for mere neighbors. As she pulled away, her eyes shining with affection, Delilah appeared at Alton's side. The younger man felt the blood drain from his face as the two women sized each other up, confusion slowly giving way to suspicion. An awkward silence fell over the trio, broken only when Mandy, ever the gracious hostess, extended her hand to Delilah and introduced herself. Delilah reciprocated, her eyes darting between Mandy and Alton, noting the familiar way Mandy's hand rested on Alton's arm. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in subtext and veiled accusations. Both women, drawing on their intuition and the subtle signs they had previously dismissed, began to piece together the truth. They spoke of their close friendship with Alton, each anecdote carefully chosen to stake their claim. Alton stood frozen between them, watching helplessly as his carefully compartmentalized worlds collided. He opened his mouth several times to speak, but no words came out. His silence only served to confirm the growing suspicions of both women. The tension reached a breaking point when Mandy, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, mentioned a unique bracelet she had given Alton, a bracelet that was at that very moment visible on his wrist. In that moment, the full extent of Alton's deception became clear to both women. Mandy's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes, while Delilah's expression hardened into one of cold fury. Without another word, both women turned and walked away, leaving Alton standing alone, the weight of his actions finally crashing down upon him. The fallout was immediate and severe. As Mandy and Delilah stormed off in opposite directions, whispers began to circulate through the festival crowd. Neighbors who had witnessed the tense exchange began to speculate, and soon the gossip spread like wildfire through Redwood. Alton, overwhelmed by the sudden exposure of his deceit, fled the festival. He spent the night pacing in his room, alternating between frantically trying to call both women and collapsing in fits of remorse and self-recrimination. The following days were a blur of confrontations and accusations. Mandy showed up at Alton's door the next morning, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Her quiet devastation was more painful to Alton than any angry outburst could have been. She spoke of betrayal, of shattered trust, and of the love she thought they had shared. When she left, Alton knew that something irreparable had broken between them. Delilah's reaction was markedly different. She refused to answer Alton's calls or texts, instead sending a scathing email that laid bare all of his lies and manipulations. Her words, sharp as knives, cut through any remaining illusions Alton had about the nobility of his actions. She made it clear that he was never to contact her again. As news of the affair spread, Alton found himself ostracized by the community he had so easily charmed just months before. Dirty looks and whispered comments followed him whenever he ventured out. His shifts at the coffee shop became exercises in endurance as he faced the judgment and curiosity of customers who had once adored him. But the worst was yet to come. 1 week after the festival, Alton received a visit from Gregory Carell, Mandy's husband. The normally composed surgeon was trembling with barely contained rage as he confronted Alton about the affair. It was clear that the exposure of Mandy's infidelity had shattered the Carells' already fragile marriage. As the dust began to settle, Alton was left to face the consequences of his actions. He had not only broken the hearts of 2 women, but had also disrupted the lives of everyone around them. The once peaceful neighborhood of Redwood had been irrevocably changed, its residents forced to confront the reality that even in their idyllic suburb, passion and deception could lead to devastating consequences. In the weeks following the revelation at the Harvest Festival, the 2 women, once friendly neighbors, now avoided each other at all costs, their shared humiliation and anger creating an invisible barrier between them. Mandy's life spiraled into chaos. Her husband, Gregory, oscillated between cold fury and desperate attempts to salvage their marriage. Their arguments, once confined to hushed tones behind closed doors, now spilled out into the open. Neighbors pretended not to notice, as shouting matches echoed through the Carells' usually quiet home. Mandy threw herself into her art with a frenetic energy, producing dark, turbulent pieces that reflected her inner turmoil. She spent hours locked in her studio, emerging only to face the wreckage of her personal life. Her once pristine appearance became disheveled, her eyes hollow with grief and lack of sleep. Delilah, on the other hand, retreated into herself. She worked from home, avoiding the pitying glances and whispered comments of her neighbors. Her brief period of renewed confidence shattered. She found herself slipping back into the insecurities that had plagued her after her divorce. Clients noticed a decline in the quality of her work, and several took their business elsewhere. As the initial shock wore off, the women's pain began to transmute into anger, not just at Alton but at each other. They began to see each other as rivals, each blaming the other for the destruction of their relationship with Alton and the upheaval in their lives. The tension between them came to a head one afternoon at the local supermarket. Mandy and Delilah found themselves face to face in the produce section, their shopping carts colliding in a jarring metaphor for their collided lives. What started as terse apologies quickly escalated into a heated exchange of accusations and insults. Delilah, her voice shaking with emotion, accused Mandy of using Alton to escape her loveless marriage. Mandy retaliated by insinuating that Delilah's desperation had made her an easy target for Alton's manipulation. The argument grew louder, drawing the attention of other shoppers, until a store manager was forced to intervene. The incident at the supermarket marked a turning point. What had been a private scandal became a public spectacle, dividing the community of Redwood. People began to take sides, some sympathizing with Mandy's marital struggles, others relating to Delilah's vulnerability as a divorcee. The women found themselves at the center of a maelstrom of gossip and judgment. As the conflict between Mandy and Delilah intensified, Alton became an almost forgotten figure in the drama. He had retreated from public life, rarely leaving his house except to go to work. When he did venture out, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone he passed. But the young man's attempt to fade into the background would prove futile. Unbeknownst to him, his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The simmering tensions between Mandy and Delilah were about to boil over, with devastating consequences for everyone involved. The morning of November 15th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Across the street, Delilah Frost was awake, staring at her computer screen as she tried to focus on a project due later that day. Her work, once a source of pride and fulfillment, now felt hollow. She found herself constantly distracted by thoughts of Alton, of Mandy, of the life she had briefly thought might be possible before it all came crashing down. The catalyst for the day's events came in the form of a simple email. Delilah, in a moment of weakness, had decided to reach out to Alton. Her message was brief, a request to meet, to find some closure on their relationship. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, unaware of the chain reaction she had just set in motion. Mandy, who had taken to checking Alton's email, his password unchanged from when they were lovers, saw the message pop up in his inbox. Something inside her snapped. The thought of Alton and Delilah rekindling their relationship, of being left behind while they moved on together, was more than she could bear. In a haze of jealousy and pain, Mandy made her way to Gregory's study. She knew he kept a handgun in his desk drawer, a precaution he'd taken after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood years ago. With shaking hands, she retrieved the weapon, its weight unfamiliar and terrifying in her grasp. Meanwhile, Delilah had decided to clear her head with a walk. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks as she made her way down the street, lost in thought. She was so distracted that she didn't notice Mandy approaching until it was too late. Mandy confronted Delilah on the sidewalk, her words a jumble of accusations and grief. Neighbors would later recount hearing raised voices, the sound of an argument escalating rapidly. Delilah, caught off guard by Mandy's sudden appearance and evident distress, tried to calm the situation, her hands raised in a placating gesture. What happened next would be pieced together from eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence. In her heightened emotional state, Mandy produced the gun. Whether she intended to use it or merely to threaten is unclear. Delilah, seeing the weapon, made a move, either to disarm Mandy or to flee. A single shot rang out, shattering the morning quiet of Redwood. Delilah crumpled to the ground, a bloom of red spreading across her chest. Mandy stood frozen, the gun slipping from her nerveless fingers to clatter on the sidewalk. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. Neighbors, drawn by the sound of the gunshot, rushed from their homes. Someone called 911, while others attempted to render first aid to the fallen Delilah. Mandy remained rooted to the spot, her face a mask of shock and horror, as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. By the time police and paramedics arrived, it was too late. Delilah Frost was pronounced dead at the scene, her life extinguished in a moment of passion and madness. Mandy offered no resistance as she was led away in handcuffs, her blank stare and tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the vibrant, confident woman she had been just months before. As news of the shooting spread, the residents of Redwood were left to grapple with the shocking turn of events. The idyllic facade of their neighborhood had been irreparably shattered, leaving in its wake a community forever changed by tragedy. The police investigation moved swiftly, with multiple witnesses and Mandy Carell's immediate surrender. There was little mystery surrounding the events of that fateful morning. However, as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a complex web of relationships and emotions that had led to the tragic outcome. Gregory Carell, Mandy's husband, found himself thrust into an impossible situation. As a prominent member of the community, he was now faced with the public humiliation of his wife's infidelity, coupled with the horror of her actions. He retreated from public life, taking a leave of absence from the hospital where he worked. The investigation also brought to light the extent of Mandy's emotional distress in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Friends and neighbors, previously hesitant to get involved, now came forward with accounts of her erratic behavior and apparent mental decline. These revelations would later play a crucial role in her legal defense. Delilah Frost's family arrived from out of state, shell-shocked and grieving. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to the weapon used in the shooting. The gun, legally registered to Gregory Carell, had been improperly stored, raising questions about his potential liability in the incident. This development added another complex dimension to an already multifaceted case. The trial of Mandy Carell began 6 months after the shooting. The prosecution painted Mandy as a cold-blooded killer, arguing that her actions were premeditated and born of jealousy. They presented evidence of her declining mental state and the calculated retrieval of the weapon as proof of intent. The defense, however, portrayed Mandy as a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to the brink by betrayal and emotional turmoil. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about the effects of prolonged stress and emotional trauma on decision-making. Alton Rhodes's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. His account of the affairs and the events leading up to the shooting provided crucial context, though his appearance on the stand was clearly painful for all involved. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Mandy Carell was found guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than the prosecution had sought. The judge, taking into account the circumstances and Mandy's lack of prior criminal history, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. In the years following the trial, the residents of Redwood struggled to move forward. The neighborhood, once known for its tranquility, now carried the weight of tragedy. In the quiet town of Riverwood, the Matthews family was well known and well liked. John Matthews, a charismatic businessman, his wife Jane, a dedicated nurse, and Jane's teenage daughter Ava painted a picture of suburban bliss. However, behind closed doors, shadows of deceit and betrayal lurked. One fateful night, Ava was found dead in her bedroom and the town's illusion of peace shattered. Detective David Hunter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the toughest cases, was called to the scene. As he surveyed the Matthews home, he could sense the undercurrent of tension. The initial reports pointed towards a domestic dispute gone tragically wrong, but Hunter's instincts told him there was more to this story. Jane was found crumpled on the floor, wailing inconsolably as she clung to her daughter's lifeless body. John's face was a mask of shock and grief, but something about his demeanor struck Hunter as off. In the days that followed, the investigation would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Detective Hunter arrived at the Matthews residence on a chilly autumn evening. The house, a modest two-story home with a well-manicured lawn, stood eerily silent. Inside, the once warm and inviting living room was now a flurry of activity, with uniformed officers and forensic technicians meticulously combing through the scene. Ava's room was at the end of a narrow hallway on the second floor. The door was ajar, and a pool of blood stained the beige carpet just inside the threshold. Ava lay sprawled on her bed, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Her throat had been slashed, a brutal end to a young life filled with promise. Hunter's gaze moved around the room, noting the signs of a struggle. The nightstand was overturned, and a lamp lay shattered on the floor. He turned to the forensic officer. "What have we got?" The officer, a young woman named Carla, responded, "It's a mess. No signs of forced entry, and no murder weapon yet." Looks like she fought back, though. Downstairs, Jane Matthews sat on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. John hovered nearby, his arm around her shoulders. Jane's eyes were hollow, and she clung to John as if he were a lifeline. Hunter approached them, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Matthews, can you tell me what happened?" Jane's voice trembled as she spoke. "I came home from work and found her like this. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. How could this happen?" John tightened his grip on her shoulder, his face a mixture of sorrow and anger. "We're going to find out who did this, Jane. I promise." Hunter studied John's face, noting the intensity in his eyes. He turned to his partner, Officer Johnson, who was taking notes nearby. "Get statements from the neighbors. See if anyone saw or heard anything unusual." As the investigation continued into the night, Hunter's mind raced with questions. Who could have wanted Ava dead? Was it a random act of violence or something more personal? The answers would come, but not without unearthing the dark secrets that lay hidden within the Matthews family. The Matthews family had lived in Riverwood for over a decade. John Matthews, a successful entrepreneur, owned a small chain of hardware stores. His business acumen and charm made him a respected figure in the community. Jane, his wife, was a nurse at the local hospital, known for her kindness and dedication. Ava, Jane's daughter from a previous marriage, was a bright and outgoing teenager, excelling in both academics and extracurricular activities. John and Jane's marriage appeared strong from the outside. They were often seen at community events, always together, always smiling. But behind the facade, their relationship was strained. John was often away on business trips, and Jane's demanding job left little time for family. Ava, caught in the middle, struggled with feelings of abandonment and longing for a stable family life. Ava's relationship with John was complicated. She admired his success and charm, but resented his frequent absences and the way he seemed to dominate her mother's attention. Their interactions were often tense, with Ava pushing back against John's authority. Despite this, she confided in her friends that she wished she could have a closer bond with him. Jane's love for Ava was undeniable, but their relationship was not without its challenges. As Ava entered her teenage years, the typical mother-daughter conflicts arose, exacerbated by Jane's long hours at work. Despite their disagreements, Jane was fiercely protective of Ava, always striving to provide her with the best opportunities. The Matthews neighbors, the Carters, were a significant presence in their lives. Lisa Carter, a vibrant woman with a magnetic personality, often visited Jane. The two women had become close friends, bonding over shared interests and the challenges of raising teenagers. Lisa's husband, Mark, a quiet and reserved man, worked as an accountant and kept mostly to himself. Unbeknownst to Jane, John and Lisa's friendship had crossed boundaries, Their affair began innocently enough, with casual conversations and shared drinks. But as John's discontent with his marriage grew, so did his attraction to Lisa. They found solace in each other's company, their clandestine meetings becoming more frequent and more intense. Ava, perceptive and curious, noticed the subtle changes. She saw the stolen glances, the hushed conversations, and the lingering touches. One evening, she followed John to the Carters' house, witnessing the undeniable proof of their affair. Shocked and betrayed, Ava confronted John, demanding he end the affair and tell Jane the truth. John's reaction was swift and violent. Fearful of his secret being exposed, he lashed out at Ava, threatening her to keep quiet. Ava, determined to protect her mother, refused to back down. The tension between them escalated, culminating in the tragic events of that fateful night. The Matthews' seemingly perfect life was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. As Detective Hunter delved deeper into their history, he began to see the cracks in their facade. The truth, he knew, was buried beneath layers of betrayal and anger. It was up to him to uncover it and bring justice to Ava. Detective David Hunter was known for his tenacity and keen instincts. With over 2 decades of experience, he had seen it all, from petty thefts to gruesome homicides. As he stood in the Matthews' living room, he felt the familiar rush of determination. This case was personal. He could feel the weight of it bearing down on him. Hunter began his investigation by interviewing the Matthews' neighbors. The Carters were first on his list. Lisa Carter, visibly shaken, recounted her interactions with the Matthews, emphasizing her close friendship with Jane. Mark Carter, on the other hand, seemed distant and evasive, his eyes darting around nervously as he spoke. Lisa admitted that she had seen John more often recently, but she attributed it to their shared social circles. Mark, when pressed, mentioned hearing arguments from the Matthews house but couldn't provide specific details. Hunter noted the inconsistencies in their statements, his suspicion growing. Back at the precinct, Hunter and his partner, Officer Johnson, reviewed the evidence collected from the crime scene. The lack of forced entries suggested that Ava knew her attacker. The struggle indicated she fought back, which meant the killer likely bore defensive wounds. Hunter decided to focus on the Matthews family dynamics. He arranged an interview with Jane, hoping to gain more insight into her relationship with Ava and John. Jane, still reeling from the shock, struggled to articulate her thoughts. She described Ava as a loving but headstrong teenager, often clashing with John over trivial matters. "Did you notice any changes in John's behavior recently?" Hunter asked, leaning forward. Jane hesitated, then nodded. He seemed more distant, more stressed. "I thought it was work-related. He was traveling a lot, and we hardly had time together." Hunter's mind raced. The frequent business trips could be a cover for something else. He needed more information about John's activities and interactions outside the family. The next day, Hunter visited John's office. His colleagues painted a picture of a dedicated but increasingly irritable man. They mentioned his frequent absences and whispered about a possible affair, though no one could provide concrete evidence. Hunter's next stop was the local coffee shop, a popular spot for the neighborhood gossip mill. The barista, a young woman with a penchant for eavesdropping, confirmed seeing John with Lisa Carter on multiple occasions. They seemed close, too close for just friends, she said, smirking. As pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Hunter's suspicion of John grew. He needed to find solid proof of the affair and connect it to Ava's murder. He decided to confront John directly, hoping to catch him off guard. John, seated in the interrogation room, maintained his composure. He denied any involvement in Ava's death, insisting that he was as devastated as Jane. Hunter pressed him about the affair, watching for any signs of guilt. John's facade cracked slightly. He admitted to spending time with Lisa, but insisted it was innocent. Hunter wasn't convinced. He could sense that John was hiding something, and he was determined to uncover the truth. As the investigation progressed, Hunter faced mounting pressure to close the case. The community was on edge and the media was relentless, but he knew that rushing to judgment could lead to a miscarriage of justice. He needed to stay focused and methodical, following the evidence wherever it led. Hunter's gut told him that the key to solving the case lay in understanding the true nature of the Matthews family dynamics and the hidden relationships that had turned their lives upside down. He was prepared to dig deep, no matter how uncomfortable the truths he uncovered might be. Jane Matthews sat across from Detective Hunter, her eyes red from days of weeping. She clutched a tissue, twisting it nervously in her hands. The grief and shock of Ava's murder had taken a visible toll on her, but there was a steely determination in her gaze. "Detective Hunter, I need you to understand. I loved my daughter more than anything," she began, her voice trembling. "We had our arguments, yes, but what mother and teenage daughter don't? She was everything to me." Hunter nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Tell me about the night Ava was killed. Where were you and what did you do?" "I was at the hospital, working a double shift. One of the nurses called in sick, and I had to cover for her. I left the house around 6 p.m. and didn't get back until after midnight. When I walked in and found Ava," Jane's voice broke, and she took a moment to compose herself. "Did you notice anything unusual when you came home?" Hunter asked gently. Jane shook her head. "No, everything seemed normal. The door was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. I went straight to Ava's room to check on her, and that's when I found her." Hunter leaned back, considering her words. Jane's alibi seemed solid, and her genuine grief was evident. But there was still the matter of her relationship with Ava, and the tension that had been brewing in their household. "Jane, I've spoken with some of your neighbors and colleagues. They mentioned that Ava and John didn't always get along. Can you tell me more about that?" Jane sighed, wiping away fresh tears. "John tried to be a good stepfather, but Ava resented him. She felt like he was trying to replace her father. They argued often, especially about his long absences and his strict rules." "And what about you and John? How was your relationship?" Hunter probed. "We've had our ups and downs," Jane admitted. "Lately, things have been strained. He was distant, always busy with work. I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined it would lead to this." As Jane spoke, Hunter noted the raw honesty in her words. She was a mother grieving her child, a wife grappling with the unraveling of her marriage. Despite the initial suspicion, Hunter began to believe that Jane was not involved in Ava's death. But if she wasn't the killer, then who was? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but there were still gaps. Hunter needed to dig deeper, to uncover the hidden truths that would lead him to Ava's murderer. The answer, he felt, was closer than he had initially thought. As Detective Hunter dug deeper into the Matthews family dynamics, his suspicions about John grew stronger. The rumors of an affair with Lisa Carter had to be verified, and Hunter knew that uncovering this relationship could be the key to solving Ava's murder. Hunter decided to pay another visit to Lisa Carter. She was in her garden, pruning rose bushes when he approached. Her demeanor was calm, but Hunter could see the tension in her eyes. "Lisa, I need to ask you some more questions about your relationship with John Matthews," he began. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she set down the pruning shears. "What do you want to know?" Hunter pressed on. "There have been rumors that you and John were more than just friends. I need to know if there's any truth to that." Lisa's face paled and she looked away, struggling to find her words. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Yes, it's true. John and we had an affair. It started about a year ago. We were both unhappy in our marriages, and we found comfort in each other." Hunter nodded, noting her admission. "Did Ava know about the affair?" Lisa's eyes widened in shock. "How did you know?" Hunter leaned in, his voice firm. "It's important, Lisa. Did Ava know?" Lisa nodded slowly. "Yes, she found out a few weeks ago. She saw us together and confronted John. She was furious, threatened to tell Jane. John begged her not to, but she wouldn't listen." Hunter felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces were falling into place. What happened after Ava confronted John? Lisa hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. John was frantic. He tried to reason with Ava, but she was adamant. They argued a lot after that. He told me he was scared of what Ava might do, that she could destroy both our families. Hunter thanked Lisa for her honesty and made his way back to the precinct. He reviewed the evidence once more, focusing on John's behavior and movements. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that John had something to do with Ava's murder. Hunter decided it was time to confront John with the new information. He called John into the station for another interview, hoping to catch him off guard. As John sat across from him, Hunter could see the tension in his eyes. "John, I've spoken with Lisa Carter. She confirmed your affair." Hunter began, watching John's reaction closely. John's face tightened, but he remained silent. Hunter continued. "Ava found out about the affair, didn't she? She confronted you and threatened to tell Jane." John's composure cracked. He leaned forward, his voice shaking. "Yes, she found out, but I didn't kill her. I loved her like my own daughter. She was angry, but I would never hurt her." Hunter pressed on, his voice relentless. "You were afraid of what she might do. You knew she could ruin everything. What happened that night, John?" John's eyes filled with tears, and he buried his face in his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt her. We argued, she pushed me, and I pushed back. She fell and there was blood. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." Hunter felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The truth was finally coming out. "John, you need to tell me everything. We need to know exactly what happened." John took a deep breath and began to recount the events of that night. Ava had confronted him again, demanding that he end the affair and tell Jane the truth. Their argument escalated, and in a moment of rage and fear, John lashed out. Ava fell, hitting her head on the nightstand. Seeing her lifeless body, John realized the gravity of what he had done. "I didn't mean to kill her," John repeated, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to stop her from destroying our lives." Hunter listened, his heart heavy with the weight of John's confession. Ava's death was a tragic result of a web of lies and betrayals. The truth was finally out, but the pain and loss it caused could never be undone. Hunter knew that John would face justice for his actions, but the real challenge would be helping Jane and the rest of the community heal from this devastating ordeal. The truth had been uncovered, but its consequences would ripple through their lives for years to come. Detective Hunter left the interrogation room, the weight of John's confession heavy on his shoulders. The case had taken a toll on everyone involved, but he felt a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that the truth was finally out. Ava's death was no longer a mystery, and her killer would face justice. Hunter returned to his office and began to piece together the final report. He reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and John's confession, ensuring that everything was in order. As he worked, he couldn't help but reflect on the twists and turns of the investigation. He thought back to the initial days when Jane had been the prime suspect. Her grief-stricken state and the strained relationship with Ava had made her an easy target for suspicion. But as he delved deeper, he realized that Jane's love for her daughter, despite their conflicts, was genuine and unwavering. John was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The verdict brought a sense of closure, but it was bittersweet. The community mourned Ava's loss, and the once respected John Matthews was now a pariah, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. In the end, the story of Ava Matthews was one of sorrow, but also of resilience and hope. It highlighted the fragile nature of human relationships and the profound impact of truth and justice. For Detective Hunter and the people of Riverwood, it was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, even in the face of life's darkest moments. On a crisp autumn morning in 2019, the body of Samantha Davenport was discovered in the basement of her modest suburban home, the victim of a brutal and ritualistic murder. At the center of this horrifying tale was Josh Davenport, a 48-year-old insurance adjuster whose unremarkable life belied the shocking acts he would eventually commit. To his neighbors, Josh was a quiet, somewhat awkward man who kept to himself. Few could have imagined the turmoil brewing beneath his placid exterior, or the sinister forces that would ultimately drive him to murder. Josh Davenport's journey to becoming a murderer began long before he ever logged onto the dark web. Born in 1971 to working-class parents, Josh was a shy and introverted child who struggled to form meaningful connections with his peers. His father, a stern factory worker, showed little affection and often berated Josh for his lack of athletic prowess and social skills. His mother, though loving, was overwhelmed by her own struggles with depression and was unable to provide the emotional support Josh desperately needed. Throughout his school years, Josh found solace in books and computers, excelling academically but failing to develop the social skills necessary to navigate the complexities of human relationships. He graduated high school with honors, but opted to attend the local community college rather than venturing away from the familiar confines of his town. It was during his college years that Josh experienced his first taste of romantic connection. Samantha, a kind-hearted nursing student, saw past Josh's awkward exterior and was drawn to his intelligence and quiet sensitivity. Their relationship blossomed, and for a time Josh believed he had found the acceptance and love he had always craved. After graduation, Josh secured a job as an insurance adjuster at a local firm, while Samantha began her career as a registered nurse at a general hospital. They married in 1996, settling into a modest home not far from where Josh had grown up. For the first few years, their life together seemed idyllic, but cracks soon began to appear in their relationship. Josh's innate insecurity and fear of abandonment manifested as jealousy and possessiveness. He grew increasingly paranoid about Samantha's interactions with male colleagues and patients, often accusing her of infidelity without cause. Samantha, in turn, became frustrated with Josh's lack of emotional maturity and his inability to trust her. Their arguments grew more frequent and intense, driving a wedge between them that widened with each passing year. As he approached middle age, Josh found himself grappling with a profound sense of disappointment and failure. His career had stagnated, with younger colleagues passing him by for promotions. The dream of starting a family had long since faded, as fertility issues and the strain on their marriage made parenthood an increasingly distant possibility. By his mid-40s, Josh had become a shell of his former self. He went through the motions at work, returning home each evening to a house filled with tension and unspoken resentment. Samantha had grown distant, throwing herself into her career and volunteer work, leaving Josh to confront his loneliness and sense of inadequacy and solitude. It was in this state of desperation and vulnerability that Josh first turned to the internet as a means of escape. What began as harmless browsing of forums and chat rooms gradually led him to explore darker corners of the web, searching for anything to fill the void that had consumed his life. Little did he know that this digital journey would lead him to the doorstep of a group that would exploit his weaknesses and set him on a path to unimaginable darkness. Josh's descent into the world of the dark web began innocuously enough. Late one night, unable to sleep and desperate for some form of human connection, he found himself browsing online forums dedicated to topics ranging from conspiracy theories to the occult. These digital spaces offered Josh a sense of anonymity and acceptance he had never experienced in his day-to-day life. As he delved deeper into these online communities, Josh encountered mentions of the dark web, a hidden part of the internet accessible only through specialized software. Initially, Josh's forays into the dark web were driven by curiosity rather than malice. He marveled at the vast array of information and services available, both legal and illegal. Josh's exploration of the dark web coincided with a particularly difficult period in his marriage. Samantha had recently received a promotion at work, which only served to highlight Josh's own career stagnation. Their arguments had become more frequent and bitter, often ending with Samantha sleeping in the spare bedroom. The dark web became Josh's refuge, a place where he could escape the failures and disappointments of his real life. It was during one of his late-night browsing sessions that Josh stumbled upon a forum. The site's black background and crimson text created an aura of mystery and danger that immediately captivated Josh. As he read through the posts, he found discussions of ancient rituals, dark powers, and the promise of transformation for those deemed worthy. Something about the forum's blend of occult knowledge and promises of personal empowerment resonated deeply with Josh. Here was a group that seemed to offer the sense of purpose and belonging he had craved his entire life. Despite a faint voice of caution in the back of his mind, Josh created an account and made his first post, introducing himself as a seeker of hidden truths. The response was almost immediate. Within minutes, Josh received welcoming messages from other members, each more effusive than the last. As he basked in this sudden attention and acceptance, Josh failed to recognize the predatory nature of the interest being shown in him. He had taken his first step into a world that would ultimately consume him, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy and horror. The forum was far more than just another dark web cult. It was a carefully constructed digital ecosystem designed to identify, manipulate, and exploit vulnerable individuals like Josh Davenport. At its core, the group presented itself as a modern mystery cult, blending elements of ancient paganism, satanic imagery, and New Age spirituality into a seductive tapestry of esoteric knowledge and promised power. The forum's structure was deceptively simple at first glance. New members like Josh started in the outer circle, known as the Seekers. Here they were encouraged to share their personal struggles and desires, all under the guise of seeking spiritual guidance. More experienced members, called guides, would respond with carefully crafted messages of support and understanding, gradually introducing the group's core beliefs and practices. As seekers proved their dedication through active participation and completion of assigned spiritual exercises, they could progress to the rank of initiate. This inner circle had access to more specialized sub-forums and one-on-one mentoring sessions with higher-ranking members. It was at this level that the true nature of the cult began to reveal itself, with discussions of blood rituals, sacrificial magic, and the accumulation of dark energies. At the pinnacle of the dark forum stood the enigmatic figure known only as the Crimson Prophet. This individual, whose true identity remained a closely guarded secret, was revered by cult members as a direct conduit to ancient and powerful dark forces. The Crimson Prophet's posts were rare but always impactful, written in a cryptic style that invited multiple interpretations and sparked fierce debates among the followers. Key members of the cult played specific roles in the indoctrination and manipulation of newcomers like Josh. There was Midnight Whisper, a self-proclaimed empath who excelled at identifying and exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. Darksage served as the group's loremaster, weaving together mythologies and occult traditions to create a compelling narrative of secret knowledge. Shadowwalker acted as the cult's enforcer, subtly threatening those who showed signs of doubt or resistance. The beliefs propagated by the cult of the Forum were a toxic blend of fatalism, elitism, and promised salvation through darkness. Members were taught that the world was inherently corrupt, and that true power could only be achieved by embracing humanity's darkest impulses. The cult preached that certain individuals, their followers, were chosen by dark forces to bring about a new age of chaos and transformation. Rituals played a central role in the cult's practices. These began as seemingly harmless meditation exercises and symbolic gestures performed in front of webcams. However, as members progressed through the ranks, the rituals became increasingly extreme, often involving self-harm, sexual degradation, and eventually, acts of violence against others. Financial exploitation was another key aspect of the cult's operations. Members were encouraged to make offerings to prove their dedication, with higher ranks requiring ever larger financial commitments. As Josh Davenport delved deeper into the cult, he remained unaware of the full scope of the organization he had joined. Josh's progression from seeker to initiate was rapid, fueled by his desperate need for acceptance and his willingness to embrace the cult's teachings. He eagerly completed each assigned task, from meditation exercises focused on channeling dark energies to more disturbing activities like recording himself reciting blasphemous oaths in front of a makeshift altar. As Josh delved deeper into the cult's ideology, his behavior in the real world began to change noticeably. He grew more withdrawn at work, his performance slipping to the point where he received a formal warning from his supervisor. At home, the distance between him and Samantha widened into an unbridgeable chasm. When she attempted to discuss her concerns about his changed demeanor, Josh reacted with uncharacteristic anger, accusing her of trying to hold him back from his true potential. The rituals Josh performed grew increasingly extreme. What began as simple candle-lighting ceremonies evolved into bloodletting rituals, with Josh using a ceremonial dagger provided by the cult to make small cuts on his arms and chest. He meticulously documented these acts, sharing the images with his online mentors who praised his dedication and promised that greater power awaited him. Josh's physical appearance began to deteriorate as he neglected his health in favor of spending more time online. He lost weight. His skin took on a pallid hue and dark circles formed under his eyes from countless nights spent hunched over his computer screen. Samantha's pleas for him to seek help fell on deaf ears, as Josh convinced himself that she simply couldn't understand the profound transformation he was undergoing. As Josh progressed through the ranks of the cult, he was granted access to more exclusive areas of the forum. Here, he encountered discussions of even darker practices, including animal sacrifice and the harnessing of sexual energy for magical purposes. The turning point came when Josh was selected for a one-on-one digital audience with the Crimson Prophet. This rare honor filled Josh with a sense of pride and purpose he hadn't felt in years. As he sat before his computer, heart racing in anticipation, Josh felt that he was on the verge of unlocking the secrets of the universe. He had no way of knowing that this conversation would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy and the destruction of everything he had ever known. The digital audience with the Crimson Prophet marked a critical juncture in Josh's descent into darkness. The encounter was carefully orchestrated to maximize its psychological impact, with Josh instructed to prepare his sacred space, don ceremonial robes, and engage in a preparatory ritual involving meditation and self-flagellation. "The prophet, you have been chosen," the message began. You stand at the threshold of true power, but the path forward requires the ultimate sacrifice. Are you prepared to shed the last vestiges of your former self and embrace the darkness that will set you free? Josh's fingers trembled as he typed his response. I am ready, great prophet. Tell me what I must do. What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. The Crimson Prophet began by reinforcing Josh's sense of specialness and destiny. They wove a narrative that recast Josh's life struggles as tests of worthiness, positioning him as a long-awaited messiah figure within the cult's mythology. The prophet then began to probe Josh's psyche, asking pointed questions about his relationships, particularly with Samantha. Josh, his inhibitions lowered by the intoxicating atmosphere of the encounter, poured out his frustrations and resentments. He spoke of feeling emasculated by Samantha's success, of the gnawing fear that she would leave him for someone better. With each confession, the prophet offered validation and twisted guidance. Your wife is an anchor, holding you back from your true potential, the prophet declared. She is a servant of the light, unconsciously working to suppress your growing power. As long as she lives, you can never fully embrace your destiny. The suggestion of violence was introduced gradually, cloaked in the language of ritual and sacrifice. The prophet spoke of ancient rites that required the offering of that which the aspirant held most dear. In Josh's case, the prophet asserted, this could only mean one thing: Samantha's life. By the end of the session, Josh's mind was reeling. The prophet left him with a set of detailed instructions for a ritual that would supposedly unleash his latent powers, a ritual that would culminate in Samantha's death. Perform this rite, and you will be reborn as a living god, the prophet promised. Fail and you will be cast out, forever unworthy of the gifts that could have been yours. As the prophet's avatar faded from the screen, Josh sat in stunned silence, the full weight of what he was considering crashing down upon him. A small part of him recognized the madness of what he was contemplating, but that voice was quickly drowned out by the chorus of his own insecurities and the seductive whispers of promised power. The week leading up to the fateful night was a blur of feverish preparation and mounting tension for Josh. By day, he went through the motions of his normal life, his colleagues and even Samantha unaware of the storm raging within him. By night, he meticulously gathered the components for the ritual as specified by the Crimson Prophet. Black candles, a silver chalice, a ceremonial dagger with a bone handle, and various herbs and powders of dubious origin. As the designated date approached, Josh's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He barely slept, spending hours poring over the instructions he'd been given, memorizing the incantations and visualizing the act he was about to commit. Samantha, sensing the growing tension, made several attempts to reach out to Josh. She suggested counseling, tried to engage him in conversations about their future, and even planned a weekend getaway in a last-ditch effort to rekindle their connection. Josh rebuffed each overture, his mind already set on the grim task ahead. On the evening of October 15, 2019, Samantha Davenport returned home from her shift at the hospital, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet night with her husband. The house was dark as she entered, save for a faint flickering light emanating from the basement door. Samantha called out Josh's name, receiving no response. Concerned, she made her way down the basement stairs, unaware that she was walking into a nightmare. The scene that greeted Samantha was like something out of a horror film. The basement had been transformed into a macabre ritual space. Flat candles formed a large circle in the center of the room, their flames casting writhing shadows on the walls. Strange symbols had been painted on the floor and walls, in what looked disturbingly like blood. In the center of the circle stood Josh, clad in a black robe, his eyes wild and unfocused. Samantha, what are you doing here? Josh's voice was barely recognizable, a hoarse whisper that sent chills down Samantha's spine. You weren't supposed to be home yet. It's not time. Samantha, frozen in shock and fear, struggled to comprehend the scene before her. Josh, what is all this? What's going on? Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man before her with the husband she thought she knew. Josh's demeanor shifted, a cruel smile playing across his lips. You're early, my dear, but perhaps this is meant to be. The Dark Lords work in mysterious ways. He gestured for Samantha to enter the circle. Come, join me, be part of my ascension. As Samantha took a hesitant step backward, Josh lunged forward with surprising speed. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and dragged her into the circle. Samantha's screams were cut short as Josh clamped a hand over her mouth, forcing her to the ground. What followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. Josh, lost in the throes of his delusion, began to recite the incantations he had so carefully memorized. His voice rose and fell in an unnatural cadence as he called upon dark forces that existed only in the twisted mythology of the cult. Samantha fought desperately, but Josh's madness lent him an inhuman strength. He bound her wrists and ankles with cord, heedless of her muffled pleas and tears. As he reached for the ceremonial dagger, a fleeting look of doubt crossed his face. For a moment, the man Samantha had married seemed to resurface, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized what he was about to do. But the moment passed. Josh's features hardened once more as he raised the dagger high. "This is my sacrifice," he intoned. "With this offering, I claim my power and break the chains of my old life." The dagger plunged down, and Samantha's body jerked as the blade pierced her chest. Josh, lost in a frenzy of bloodlust and religious ecstasy, stabbed again and again. As Samantha's life ebbed away, Josh continued the ritual. He collected her blood in the silver chalice, anointed his forehead with it, and chanted the final words of the ceremony. He waited, breathless for the rush of power the Crimson Prophet had promised. Seconds ticked by, then minutes, but nothing changed. The basement remained silent, save for Josh's ragged breathing and the soft hiss of guttering candles. Slowly, terribly, reality began to assert itself. The magnitude of what he had done crashed over Josh like a tidal wave. He looked down at his blood-soaked hands, at the lifeless body of the woman he had once vowed to love and protect, and a wail of anguish tore from his throat. There was no power, no transcendence, only the stark horror of his actions. Josh collapsed beside Samantha's body, cradling her cooling form as sobs racked his body. He remained there through the night, muttering incoherent apologies and pleas for forgiveness to unhearing ears. The discovery of Samantha Davenport's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community. It was the Davenports' next-door neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, who first raised the alarm. Concerned by the absence of any activity from the house and unable to reach either Josh or Samantha by phone, she called the police to perform a wellness check. Officer Mark Ramirez, a seasoned member of the town's police department, arrived at the Davenport residence at approximately 10:30 a.m. on October 15th. His knock went unanswered, but he noticed a faint, unpleasant odor emanating from the house. Following protocol, Officer Ramirez circled the property, finding the back door unlocked. The smell intensified as he entered, leading him to the partially open basement door. What Officer Ramirez discovered in the basement would haunt him for years to come. Samantha's body lay in the center of a crude occult circle, surrounded by burned-out candles and bizarre symbols. Josh sat nearby, catatonic and covered in dried blood, still clutching his wife's lifeless hand. The crime scene investigators who arrived shortly after were confronted with a gruesome tableau that seemed more fitting for a horror movie than a suburban home. Forensic analyst Dr. Lydia Chen later remarked that in her 15 years on the job, she had never seen a crime scene so ritualistic in nature. The investigation, led by Detective Sandra Morris, quickly focused on unraveling the mystery of Josh's apparent descent into madness. A search of the Davenport home revealed a laptop in Josh's study, which proved to be a crucial piece of evidence. Cyber forensics expert Alan Tsung was brought in to analyze its contents. What Tsung discovered was disturbing. Months of forum posts and private messages documenting Josh's involvement with the cult. The sheer volume of data was staggering, painting a clear picture of Josh's gradual indoctrination and the cult's deliberate manipulation of his vulnerabilities. As investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover other cases across the country with similarities to the Davenport murder. A pattern emerged of lonely middle-aged individuals being drawn into the cult and subsequently committing violent acts. Meanwhile, Josh Davenport remained in a near catatonic state, unresponsive to questioning and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. He was placed under psychiatric hold at the local mental health facility, where Dr. Elena Rodriguez took charge of his care. Initial evaluations suggested a complete mental breakdown, with Josh alternating between periods of unresponsiveness and bouts of hysterical rambling about dark lords and promised power. As the investigation progressed, the community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. A candlelight vigil was held for Samantha, attended by tens of local residents. The breakthrough in the Davenport case came 3 months after the murder, following tireless efforts by a joint task force of local law enforcement and FBI agents. The key to unraveling the mystery lay in a series of encrypted messages recovered from Josh's laptop, which cyber forensics expert Alan Sung finally managed to decode. These messages revealed the true extent of the cult's operations and the sophisticated methods they used to manipulate vulnerable individuals. The cult's leadership structure was exposed, with the identity of the Crimson Prophet traced to a former psychology professor. Armed with this information, investigators coordinated simultaneous raids targeting key members of the cult. Crimson Prophet was apprehended at a remote compound where she had been living under an assumed identity. Josh Davenport finally emerged from his catatonic state. In a series of emotionally charged sessions with Dr. Rodriguez, he began to recount the events leading up to Samantha's murder. Josh's confession, filled with remorse and horror at his own actions, provided crucial details that helped prosecutors build their case against the cult leaders. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological tactics employed by the cult, while former members provided chilling accounts of their experiences. Josh Davenport, deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. His case became a focal point for discussions about criminal responsibility and the nature of culpability in cases of extreme manipulation. In the aftermath of the trial, lawmakers pushed for new legislation to combat online radicalization and protect vulnerable individuals from predatory groups. For the community, the resolution of the case brought a measure of closure, but the scars left by the tragedy ran deep. The Davenport house, once a crime scene and now a painful reminder, was eventually demolished. In its place, the community erected a small memorial garden dedicated to Samantha and other victims of the cult. On a sweltering July afternoon in 2019, the facade of suburban bliss was shattered in a way that would haunt the community for years to come. At the center of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker with a reputation for his work ethic and community involvement, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor known for her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. They had been fixtures in the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage the envy of many. Next door lived the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college sophomore home for the summer. The Coopers had moved in 5 years ago, and while they kept to themselves more than most, they were generally well liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted that these ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. Thaddeus Henderson had always been driven by ambition. Born to working-class parents in rural Iowa, he had clawed his way up the social ladder through sheer determination and an almost obsessive work ethic. By his early 30s, he had established himself as a rising star at a financial company. His colleagues admired his sharp analytical mind, and his clients appreciated his no-nonsense approach to wealth management. Margot Sinclair, as she was known before her marriage, had a different trajectory. The daughter of a college professor and an artist, she grew up in a household that valued creativity and self-expression. She studied modern dance at the university, dreaming of a career on stage. However, a knee injury in her senior year derailed those plans, leading her to pivot towards yoga and wellness coaching. Their paths crossed at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddeus, already successful but lacking in social graces, was immediately drawn to Margot's vivacity and charm. For Margot, Thaddeus represented stability and the promise of a comfortable life that would allow her to pursue her passions without financial worry. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. The early years of their marriage were happy ones. Thaddeus's career continued to flourish, and he took pride in providing Margot with the life he felt she deserved. Margot, for her part, threw herself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were crucial for Thaddeus's networking. She also began teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio, finding fulfillment in helping others achieve balance and inner peace. But as the years wore on, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed life. Thaddeus's work hours grew longer, his ambition pushing him to chase ever bigger deals and clients. He was rarely home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere, constantly checking his phone for emails or market updates. Margot, approaching her 40s, found herself increasingly restless. The yoga classes and charity committees that once filled her days now felt hollow. She began to question the choices that had led her to this point, wondering if she had traded her dreams for a gilded cage. The couple's failure to conceive, despite years of trying, added another layer of strain to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Hendersons' marriage was a carefully maintained facade. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the golden couple. Thaddeus continued to excel at work, recently closing a deal that put him in line for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes were more popular than ever, her students drawn to her warmth and apparent serenity. But behind closed doors they were virtual strangers. Conversations, when they happened, were perfunctory and centered around schedules and social obligations. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, each touch laden with unspoken resentments and unfulfilled expectations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was willing to admit, even to themselves, how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the illusion, to go through the motions of a happy marriage, than to confront the emptiness that had grown between them. Little did they know that this unacknowledged chasm in their relationship was about to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would shatter not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper, a respected oncologist. Reginald had succumbed to the very disease he had spent his life fighting, leaving Elaine to raise their son Liam alone. Elaine, a soft-spoken librarian, had initially struggled to adjust to life in the new community. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old house. But the affluent suburb felt alien to her. She found solace in her books and in tending to the garden that soon became the envy of the neighborhood. Liam Cooper was 14 when they moved in, a lanky, introverted teenager more comfortable with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been difficult, and he often found himself the target of bullies who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. It was during this time that Thaddeus Henderson had taken Liam under his wing, offering him a job mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam had blossomed. The awkward teen grew into a handsome young man, his natural intelligence finally finding an outlet in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, Liam remained devoted to his mother. He worried about her isolation and loneliness, and made a point of coming home most weekends, even when his friends were planning parties or road trips. It was on one of these weekend visits in early June that he first encountered Margot Henderson in a new light. Elaine had always been grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, particularly Margot's efforts to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke of Margot's generosity, unaware of the complex emotions brewing beneath the surface of her son's polite nods. The spark that ignited the affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a balmy evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' legendary summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as usual, was holding court near the grill, regaling his colleagues with tales of his latest financial coup. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amidst the crowd, had retreated to the relative quiet of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the party by his mother, chose that moment to seek refuge from the noise and forced socializing. He entered the pool house not realizing it was occupied and found Margot struggling with a large bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. He moved to help her with the ice, their hands brushing. They stood there, momentarily frozen, the cold of the ice contrasting sharply with the heat building between them. It was Margot who broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually so articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves manufacturing reasons to be in each other's company. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, Liam offering to help in her garden. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm broke out. They ran for shelter under a nearby gazebo, laughing and breathless. As the rain poured down around them, Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Before she could think better of it, She leaned in and kissed him. From that point, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a combination of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperation to feel alive again. They met in secluded spots around town, in the back row of the local cinema, in a hidden corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, in the Henderson home when Thaddeus was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the gulf in their ages forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought long lost. Liam, for his part, was intoxicated by Margot's experience and the taboo nature of their relationship. But as the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace, a suspicious glance from Elaine when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Liam struggled with the knowledge that he was betraying Thaddeus, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot found herself lying more and more to her husband, each deception another crack in the foundation of her marriage. Yet despite the risks and the guilt, neither seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside stirred to life as its residents prepared for another week of work and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, it began like any other day. He rose early, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even stirred from sleep. Margot woke later, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Thaddeus had informed her the night before that he would be working late, a crucial client dinner that could seal his partnership deal. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over in the afternoon. Liam, who had been agonizing over the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to end things face to face. He replied with a simple, "Okay," resolving to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day passed slowly for both of them. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, her usual serenity replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, found it hard to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the conversation to come. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing furtively around to ensure none of the neighbors were watching. Margot ushered him in quickly, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. It was Liam who broke the silence, starting to say that they needed to talk. But Margot, misreading his intention and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, cut him off with a passionate kiss. Despite his reservations, Liam found himself responding, his resolve weakening in the face of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur of discarded clothes and tangled limbs. As they made their way to the master bedroom, all thoughts of ending the affair were temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his office frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he knew he'd have to redo a significant portion of his work. Frustration mounting, he made a snap decision. He would go home, regroup, and return to the office later to finish up before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus's car pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street, but thought nothing of it. Probably helping Elaine with some errand, he mused as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet as Thaddeus entered, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the noise growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. What Thaddeus saw when he opened the door would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old guy he had mentored and trusted. Then, with a roar of rage and pain, Thaddeus lunged forward, his hands, so used to manipulating numbers and shaking on business deals, now curled into fists as he grabbed Liam, yanking him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Thaddeus's first punch caught Liam squarely in the jaw, sending the younger man stumbling backward. But Liam, driven by adrenaline and fear, fought back. The two men grappled, crashing into the dresser, sending framed photos and trinkets scattering across the floor. In the chaos, No one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the dresser's top. No one saw it until Thaddeus, in a fit of blind rage, grabbed it and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Margot's scream pierced the air as the full horror of what had just transpired hit them all. In that moment, as storm clouds gathered outside and sirens wailed in the distance, the lives of everyone involved changed irrevocably. The idyllic facade of Riverside had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the community. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension, as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Henderson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddeus Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot barely clothed and hysterical. The room bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and smears of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for Liam Cooper. As paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him, Rossi began the delicate process of piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Thaddeus, still in a state of shock, was taken into custody without resistance. Margot was separately questioned. Their stories, fragmented and emotional, painted a picture of a long-simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. As word spread through the neighborhood, a crowd began to gather at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was quickly whisked away to the hospital, where Liam was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. The investigation moved quickly. Forensics teams combed through the Henderson home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now a potential murder weapon, was carefully bagged and tagged. Neighbors were interviewed, their statements adding context to the relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from the Henderson house earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a television playing too loudly. Another mentioned seeing Liam enter the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he thought it odd given Thaddeus's usual work schedule. As night fell, the gravity of the situation became clear. Liam Cooper was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m., never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddeus Henderson was elevated from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Margot, racked with guilt and facing intense scrutiny, admitted to the affair with Liam. Her statement, given through tears at the police station, provided a timeline of their relationship and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon. Thaddeus, advised by his hastily retained attorney, remained silent, but his colleagues at the company painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, working long hours in pursuit of a partnership that had seemed within reach. None, however, had suspected the depth of his marital problems or the capacity for violence that had been unleashed. The case against Thaddeus Henderson was building, but Rossi knew that in the court of public opinion, there would be no clear villains or heroes in this story. Only victims, each in their own way, of the secrets and lies that had finally come to light in the most devastating manner possible. For no one has ever expected the plot twist that's about to come. And twist that will shock everyone, including the Hendersons. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddeus Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddeus as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. Sterling suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. But it was Margot Henderson's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddeus had walked in on them and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity. But Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy while insisting that nothing justified Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness and his dreams for the future, all cut short in an act of violence. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddeus Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony was a study in contrasts, moments of apparent remorse interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, Thaddeus claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds of those involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho explained that Thaddeus's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent, aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddeus's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddeus's behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Friedman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair. He likened it to a form of psychological trauma, capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation. They highlighted how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddeus Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddeus's lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing: the events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come. Sabrina Brooks was known for her beauty and charm, qualities that had once captivated her husband, Robert. Their marriage seemed like a fairy tale, a perfect match that everyone admired. But the arrival of Robert's elderly mother, Miriam, into their home set off a chain of events that would end in unspeakable horror. Miriam was a frail but spirited woman, loved by her son and cherished by those who knew her. When Robert decided to bring her to live with them, he believed it was the right thing to do. a way to care for her in her twilight years. Sabrina, however, saw it differently. She viewed Miriam as an intruder, a threat to her domestic bliss. As tensions escalated, Sabrina's resentment turned to desperation. In a moment of madness, she concocted a deadly plan to rid herself of the woman she blamed for her misery. What followed was a chilling tale of premeditated murder, a crime that would leave an indelible mark on all who were touched by it. Sabrina and Robert's relationship began like a whirlwind romance. They met at a friend's wedding, where Robert, a successful architect, was immediately smitten by Sabrina's grace and vivacity. She worked as a freelance product photographer, and her creative spirit matched well with Robert's structured approach to life. After a brief courtship, they married and settled into a beautiful home on the outskirts of town. Miriam Brooks had lived a full life. Widowed for nearly a decade, she maintained her independence in a modest house in town. Her health had begun to decline, and Robert, ever the dutiful son, felt it was his responsibility to care for her. Miriam had always been a nurturing presence in Robert's life, and he couldn't bear the thought of her being alone. Initially, Sabrina and Miriam got along well enough. Miriam was polite and grateful, and Sabrina, though slightly apprehensive, made an effort to welcome her mother-in-law. But as weeks turned into months, the strain of their living arrangement began to show. Miriam's constant presence disrupted the couple's privacy and routine, and Sabrina felt increasingly sidelined in her own home. Robert, caught between his wife and his mother, tried to balance their needs. He was patient and kind, hoping that time would ease the tension, but Sabrina's discontent only grew. She confided in her friends about the stress she was under, seeking advice on how to cope. Some suggested patience, while others hinted that Robert's loyalty to his mother might always overshadow his marriage. The situation worsened as Miriam's health declined further. She required more care and attention, which fell primarily on Sabrina during the day while Robert was at work. The constant demands wore on her, leading to frequent arguments with Robert. He, in turn, became defensive and frustrated, unable to understand why Sabrina couldn't be more accommodating. Sabrina's resentment festered, turning into a simmering rage. She felt trapped, her life overshadowed by an elderly woman who seemed to sap all the joy from her marriage. As her desperation grew, Sabrina's thoughts took a darker turn. She began to entertain the idea of a life without Miriam, envisioning the return of her once idyllic marriage. It was in these moments of bitterness and despair that the seeds of her deadly plan were sown. Robert's decision to bring Miriam into their home was not made lightly. He had seen his mother's health decline and knew she needed more support than he could provide from a distance. After long discussions with Sabrina, he convinced her that it was the best solution. Reluctantly, Sabrina agreed, though she harbored reservations about the impact on their marriage. The day Miriam moved in, Robert and Sabrina prepared a guest room with care. Robert was excited to have his mother close, and Sabrina, though uneasy, wanted to support her husband's decision. Miriam arrived with a few suitcases and a warm smile, grateful for her son's hospitality. In the beginning, the arrangement seemed manageable. Miriam was polite and tried not to impose. She kept to her room most of the time, reading or knitting, and joined the couple for meals and occasional outings. Robert was relieved to see his mother settled and safe, but Sabrina began to feel the strain almost immediately. Miriam's presence altered the dynamics of the household. Dinner conversations that once flowed easily between Sabrina and Robert now included Miriam's comments and stories. Robert's attention was divided, and Sabrina found herself missing the intimacy they once shared. The subtle shifts in their relationship gnawed at her, creating an undercurrent of resentment. The first major conflict arose over household routines. Miriam, accustomed to her way of doing things, often interfered with Sabrina's established methods. She would rearrange the kitchen, critique Sabrina's cooking, or offer unsolicited advice on housekeeping. Sabrina, who prided herself on running an efficient home, felt undermined and disrespected. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Miriam had criticized Sabrina's choice of dessert, the couple had a heated argument. Robert, exhausted from work and the constant tension, defended his mother, insisting that Sabrina was overreacting. Sabrina, feeling betrayed and isolated, lashed out, accusing Robert of always taking his mother's side. The arguments became more frequent. Robert, torn between his love for his wife and his duty to his mother, struggled to keep the peace. He tried to mediate, suggesting compromises and asking both women to be more understanding, but the underlying issues remained unresolved, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Sabrina's resentment deepened as she felt increasingly trapped in a situation she had never wanted. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor, and she confided in a few about the constant stress she was under. Some offered sympathy, others advised her to stand her ground, but none could offer a solution that seemed viable. As the days turned into weeks, the initial harmony gave way to a persistent tension that permeated every aspect of their lives. The once warm and inviting home became a battleground of unspoken grievances and simmering anger. Sabrina's frustration reached a boiling point, and she began to fantasize about drastic measures to reclaim her life. Little did she know, those dark thoughts would soon manifest into a chilling reality. The tension in the Brooks household continued to rise, seeping into every corner of their lives. Miriam, oblivious to the depth of Sabrina's resentment, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She believed that with time things would improve, but Sabrina's patience was wearing thin, and her anger became harder to conceal. One morning, Sabrina discovered that Miriam had reorganized the pantry. What seemed like a minor inconvenience to Robert felt like a personal affront to Sabrina. She stormed into the living room where Miriam was sitting, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You can't just come in here and change everything. This is my house." Miriam looked up, startled. "I was only trying to help, dear. I didn't mean to upset you. It's not help when it's done without asking. You're just making things harder." Robert walked in just as Sabrina's voice rose, and he quickly stepped between them. "Sabrina, please calm down. She's just trying to help." Sabrina shot him a look of pure frustration. "You always take her side, Robert. I'm the one who has to deal with this every day." Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. "This isn't about sides. We're a family. We need to work together." Despite Robert's attempts to mediate, the rift between Sabrina and Miriam grew wider. Sabrina started avoiding Miriam as much as possible, retreating to her studio to work on her graphic design projects. She found solace in her work, a temporary escape from the constant strain at home. But the escape was fleeting. Every time she left her studio, she was reminded of Miriam's presence. The small irritations accumulated, each one adding to the weight of her resentment. She began to dread coming home, the once safe haven now a source of continuous stress. Friends noticed the change in Sabrina. She became more withdrawn, her usual vibrant personality overshadowed by a constant undercurrent of tension. During a coffee outing with her close friend Julia, Sabrina finally opened up about the depth of her frustration. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Julia. She's everywhere all the time. It's like I'm living with a stranger in my own home." Julia listened sympathetically. "Have you talked to Robert about how you feel?" Sabrina let out a bitter laugh. "Talked? All we do is argue about her. He doesn't see how much it's affecting me. He just wants to keep the peace." Julia reached out and squeezed Sabrina's hand. "Maybe you need to take some time for yourself. Get away for a bit. Clear your head." Sabrina nodded, but deep down she knew that a temporary escape wouldn't solve her problems. The constant presence of Miriam in her home felt like a prison sentence, one she couldn't escape from. Her thoughts grew darker, and she began to entertain ideas she had once considered unthinkable. One night, as Sabrina lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed her mind that made her shudder. What if Miriam wasn't here anymore? The idea lingered, gaining strength with each passing day. It was a forbidden thought, one that brought a sense of both horror and twisted relief. As the days turned into weeks, the seeds of a plan began to take root in Sabrina's mind. She started researching methods to make someone ill, initially out of morbid curiosity. But the more she read, the more the idea of poisoning Miriam seemed like a viable solution to her predicament. It would be quick, discreet, and if done correctly, could appear as a natural death. Sabrina's desperation clouded her judgment. She convinced herself that this was the only way to regain control of her life and salvage her marriage. The dark thoughts that had once seemed so alien now felt like a lifeline. Little did she know this decision would lead her down a path of no return, with consequences far beyond her darkest imaginings. Sabrina's desperation reached its peak as she found herself more isolated and overwhelmed by the day. The once loving and harmonious relationship with Robert now felt like a distant memory, replaced by constant arguments and mutual resentment. She began to see Miriam not as an innocent elderly woman, but as the embodiment of all her marital problems. Confiding in friends became a regular outlet for Sabrina's frustration. During a particularly emotional conversation with her friend Lisa, Sabrina's true feelings came to the surface. "I can't do this anymore, Lisa. Every day is a battle. I feel like I'm losing myself. Lisa looked concerned. You need to find a way to cope, Sabrina. Maybe you should see a therapist or take some time away. Sabrina shook her head. Therapy won't change anything. The problem is Miriam. As long as she's here, nothing will get better. Lisa hesitated, then spoke softly. Have you thought about asking her to move out? Maybe she could go to a care facility where she'd get the help she needs. Sabrina's eyes darkened. Robert would never agree to that. He's too loyal. He'd see it as abandoning her. Lisa sighed. I'm worried about you, Sabrina. This isn't healthy. You need to do something before it's too late. Sabrina nodded absently, but her mind was already elsewhere. She had considered every possible solution and always came back to the same conclusion. Miriam had to go. The idea of poisoning her mother-in-law, once a fleeting thought, now seemed like the only viable option. Sabrina began to meticulously plan Miriam's demise. She spent hours researching poisons, focusing on substances that would be difficult to detect. Her background in graphic design gave her an eye for detail, and she applied this skill to her dark new project. She discovered that certain plants, when ingested in small doses over time, could cause symptoms resembling a natural illness. With a plan in place, Sabrina started the next phase, obtaining the poison. She chose aconite, a potent toxin found in monkshood plants. It was a risky choice, but one that could be easily masked in food. She ordered the seeds online, ensuring they were delivered to a friend's address to avoid suspicion. The seeds arrived a few days later, and Sabrina carefully cultivated them in a hidden corner of her garden. She tended to them with a mixture of dread and determination, knowing that each day brought her closer to executing her plan. The process took weeks, during which the tension in the house continued to escalate. Miriam's health, already fragile, began to show signs of further decline. She frequently complained of stomach pains and nausea, symptoms that Sabrina dismissed with a feigned concern. Robert, ever the devoted son, grew increasingly worried, suggesting doctor visits and tests to determine the cause. Sabrina played her part well, expressing appropriate levels of worry and support. She accompanied Miriam to the doctor, reassuring Robert that they were doing everything possible. The doctors attributed Miriam's symptoms to her age and existing health conditions, prescribing medications that did little to alleviate her suffering. The final stage of Sabrina's plan required careful timing. She waited for a day when Robert would be away for an extended period, ensuring she had the house to herself. She prepared a special meal for Miriam, infusing it with a small amount of aconite. The dose was low enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but high enough to exacerbate Miriam's symptoms. As Miriam ate the meal, Sabrina watched her with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She felt a twisted sense of relief, believing that she was finally taking control of her life. But the act also brought a deep sense of guilt, one that gnawed at her even as she reassured herself that this was the only way. In the days that followed, Miriam's condition worsened. She grew weaker and more lethargic, her complaints of pain more frequent. Robert was beside himself with worry, while Sabrina maintained her facade of concern. The poison was doing its job, slowly but surely, and Sabrina felt both triumphant and terrified at the prospect of what she had set in motion. Sabrina's meticulous planning reached its final stages as she prepared to carry out the poisoning. The growing tension and escalating arguments with Robert only fueled her resolve. She was convinced that eliminating Miriam was the only way to restore harmony to her marriage and reclaim her life. Acquiring the aconite seeds had been a nerve-wracking process. Sabrina knew the risks involved in handling such a potent toxin, but desperation had clouded her judgment. She carefully cultivated the plants, watching them grow with a mix of dread and determination. Each step brought her closer to the point of no return. Sabrina spent hours in her studio, not working on her usual graphic design projects, but refining her plan. She researched the effects of aconite, ensuring she understood the symptoms it would produce. Vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain were common, symptoms that could easily be mistaken for a severe but natural illness in an elderly woman like Miriam. Timing was crucial. Sabrina needed to administer the poison in such a way that it would slowly deteriorate Miriam's health, making her death appear as a natural progression of her existing ailments. She decided to mix small amounts of the aconite into Miriam's food over several weeks, gradually increasing the dosage. Sabrina's first attempt was a simple broth. She chose a day when Robert was working late, giving her the time and privacy she needed. Miriam, unaware of the sinister intent behind the meal, ate the broth without suspicion. Sabrina watched her carefully, noting any signs of discomfort. In the days that followed, Miriam began to complain more frequently of stomach pains and nausea. Sabrina played the concerned daughter-in-law, offering comfort and suggesting they visit the doctor. Robert, seeing Sabrina's apparent dedication, was grateful and less inclined to suspect any foul play. Sabrina continued to administer the poison, each dose carefully calculated to avoid immediate detection. She alternated the methods of delivery, sometimes mixing it into tea, other times blending it into soups or casseroles. Each meal brought Miriam closer to the brink, her health steadily declining. Despite her outward calm, Sabrina was racked with guilt and fear. The enormity of her actions weighed heavily on her, but she convinced herself that this was the only solution. She reminded herself of the life she would regain once Miriam was gone, a life free from the constant strain and arguments. Robert's increasing concern for his mother's health provided Sabrina with the perfect cover. He arranged for multiple doctor visits, each one yielding no definitive answers. The medical professionals attributed Miriam's symptoms to her age and existing conditions, prescribing medications that did little to help. Sabrina's plan seemed to be working flawlessly. Miriam's decline was gradual, and the doctors saw no reason to suspect foul play. Sabrina's meticulous research and careful administration of the poison ensured that Miriam's symptoms matched those of a natural illness. The final dose was administered on a particularly stressful day. Robert had left for an extended business trip, leaving Sabrina and Miriam alone in the house. It was the perfect opportunity to deliver the fatal dose of aconite without immediate suspicion. The house felt unnaturally quiet, a silence that seemed to echo Sabrina's racing thoughts. Sabrina prepared Miriam's favorite soup, a creamy mushroom bisque. She measured the aconite carefully, her hand steady despite the turmoil inside her. This was it. There was no turning back. The poison, now finely ground and nearly invisible, was mixed into the soup with methodical precision. As she carried the bowl to the dining table, Sabrina forced a smile. "Lunch is ready, Miriam. I made your favorite." Miriam, looking frailer than ever, managed a weak smile. "Thank you, dear. You're so kind." Sabrina felt a pang of guilt but quickly suppressed it. She watched as Miriam slowly ate the soup, each spoonful bringing her closer to the end. The meal progressed in a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Miriam's labored breathing. As the poison took effect, Miriam's discomfort became evident. She clutched her stomach, her face contorted in pain. Sabrina maintained her facade of concern, suggesting they call a doctor. But the symptoms progressed rapidly, and soon Miriam was struggling to breathe. Sabrina dialed 911, her voice filled with feigned panic. "My mother-in-law is very ill. Please send an ambulance quickly." The paramedics arrived within minutes, finding Miriam in severe distress. They rushed her to the hospital, with Sabrina following closely behind. In the sterile confines of the emergency room, Sabrina watched as the doctors and nurses worked frantically to save Miriam. She maintained her act, shedding tears and expressing worry, but inside she felt a grim sense of relief. Despite their efforts, Miriam's condition deteriorated rapidly. The poison had done its job, and within hours Miriam passed away. The official cause of death was listed as complications from her existing health issues, exacerbated by her age. The doctors saw no reason to suspect foul play, and Sabrina's plan seemed to have succeeded perfectly. Robert was devastated when he received the news. He returned home immediately, shattered by the loss of his mother. Sabrina played the supportive wife, comforting him through his grief while hiding the dark truth. The funeral was a somber affair, with friends and family gathering to pay their respects. Sabrina's performance was flawless, her sorrow appearing genuine to all who observed, but the guilt gnawed at her. Each time Robert spoke of his mother's kindness and strength, Sabrina felt a stab of remorse. She had taken an innocent life, driven by desperation and resentment. The relief she had expected was overshadowed by the weight of her actions. She had crossed a line and there was no going back. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Robert threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from his grief. Sabrina, meanwhile, tried to resume her usual routines, but the shadow of her crime loomed large. She found it difficult to concentrate on her graphic design projects, her mind constantly replaying the events of that fateful day. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor, but Sabrina attributed it to the stress of Miriam's death and the strain on her marriage. She continued to put on a brave face, maintaining the facade of a grieving daughter-in-law, but inside she was falling apart. One night, as she lay in bed beside Robert, the enormity of her actions hit her with full force. She had committed murder, taken a life to solve her problems, and now she had to live with the consequences. The thought was overwhelming, and Sabrina found herself trembling with a mix of fear and regret. Robert, sensing her distress, reached out to comfort her. But deep down, she knew that the truth could not remain hidden forever. The seeds of her crime were planted, and it was only a matter of time before they bore fruit. Sabrina's carefully constructed world was built on a foundation of lies, and as the days passed, she began to realize that the price of her actions would be far greater than she had ever imagined. In the aftermath of Miriam's death, life in the Brooks household settled into a somber routine. Robert's grief was palpable, and Sabrina did her best to support him, all the while masking her own turmoil. She believed she had successfully concealed her crime, but the peace she longed for remained elusive. Little did she know, the real consequences of her actions were about to unfold. The initial investigation into Miriam's death was routine. The doctors attributed her passing to natural causes, given her age and existing health conditions. However, a nurse who had been present during Miriam's final hours noticed something odd. The rapid progression of her symptoms seemed unusual, even for someone of her age. The nurse, Emma Collins, mentioned her concerns to the attending physician, Dr. Alan Harris. Emma was experienced and meticulous, not one to jump to conclusions. Dr. Harris, although initially dismissive, agreed to review Miriam's case notes. Upon closer inspection, he too found the rapid deterioration puzzling. They decided to conduct a more thorough autopsy, just to be sure. The autopsy revealed traces of a toxin in Miriam's system, something that should not have been there. Dr. Harris immediately alerted the authorities, and the case was escalated to the Greenwood Police Department. Detective Laura Rogan was assigned to lead the investigation. Detective Rogan was a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail. She began by interviewing the medical staff who had attended to Miriam, gathering information about her symptoms and the timeline of her decline. The discovery of the toxin raised alarm bells, and Rogan knew this was no ordinary case. Next, Rogan turned her attention to the Brooks household. She interviewed Robert first, who was devastated by the news of a potential foul play. His genuine shock and grief were evident, and Rogan quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Sabrina, however, presented a more complex picture. Sabrina was composed during the interview, expressing appropriate levels of sadness and concern. But Rogan sensed something was off. There was a guardedness in Sabrina's demeanor, a subtle tension that didn't sit right. Rogan had seen it before, the signs of someone hiding something. Sabrina, when questioned about Miriam's health, reiterated the doctor's findings. She played the role of the caring daughter-in-law, describing how she had tried to make Miriam comfortable and had taken her to the doctor multiple times. But her story seemed rehearsed, and Rogan made a mental note to dig deeper. The detectives decided to search the Brooks house, focusing on areas where they might find evidence of poison. Sabrina grew increasingly anxious as they combed through the kitchen, the garden, and her studio. She tried to maintain her composure, but the stress was evident in her trembling hands and forced calm. In the garden, the detectives found a small patch of monkshood plants, the source of aconite. Rogan's suspicions grew. She sent samples to the lab for analysis, and the results confirmed the presence of aconite, the same toxin found in Miriam's system. The breakthrough came when the detectives discovered Sabrina's internet search history. Her computer revealed extensive research on poisons, specifically aconite, and methods of administering it. The evidence was damning, painting a clear picture of premeditated murder. Rogan confronted Sabrina with the findings. In the face of irrefutable evidence, Sabrina broke down. The facade crumbled, and she confessed to the crime, her voice filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. She explained how the strain of living with Miriam had driven her to commit the unthinkable, believing it was the only way to save her marriage. The confession shocked Robert to his core. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew, had murdered his mother. His world shattered, and he struggled to comprehend the depth of Sabrina's betrayal. The couple's friends and family were equally stunned, unable to reconcile the image of the charming, creative Sabrina with that of a cold-blooded killer. Sabrina's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The trial was set to begin 3 months after Sabrina's arrest. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Reed, presented a compelling case built on the extensive evidence gathered by Detective Rogan and her team. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the evidence and testimonies presented. The community held its breath, waiting for the verdict. When the jury finally returned, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Sabrina was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentence reflected the severity of her crime, while also acknowledging the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense. For Robert, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure. Justice had been served, but the scars left by Sabrina's actions would never fully heal. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Brooks family. Robert, now faced with the task of rebuilding his life, decided to leave Greenwood. The town, once a place of happy memories, had become a constant reminder of his loss. He moved to a different city, seeking a fresh start and hoping to find some semblance of peace. In the end, the Brooks family saga served as a stark reminder of the destructive power of desperation and the importance of compassion, understanding, and mental health support. It was a story that underscored the fragile nature of human relationships and the devastating consequences that could arise when those bonds were pushed to their breaking point. One early autumn morning, the lifeless body of Melissa Porter was discovered in her car, parked on a secluded road just outside town. Melissa, a local kindergarten teacher beloved by many, had gone missing 2 days prior, leaving behind a worried husband and a community in shock. James Porter, Melissa's husband, was the first to report her missing. James, a mild-mannered accountant, had been frantic with worry, his anxiety evident in the tremor of his voice when he spoke to the police. The discovery of Melissa's body turned his worst fears into a nightmarish reality. Alongside James, 2 other men, Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, soon came under the scrutiny of the investigation. Both had been intimately involved with Melissa, each harboring deep and complex feelings for her. Detective Sarah Davis, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind and an unyielding determination for justice, was assigned to the case. As she delved into Melissa's life and the relationships that entwined her with James, Michael, and Joe, it became clear that beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. The story of Melissa Porter's demise was not just a tale of a tragic death, but of a tangled web of love, deceit, and vengeance. It was a crisp morning when Officer Tom Harris received a call about an abandoned vehicle on the outskirts of Oakwood. As he approached the scene, the sight of Melissa Porter's car sent a chill down his spine. The car was parked haphazardly, one wheel on the gravel shoulder, the other on the grassy verge. The windows were fogged, and the faintest hint of a foul odor wafted through the air. Harris peered through the driver's window and recoiled. Melissa Porter was slumped over the steering wheel. Her skin was pallid, and a faint trickle of blood had dried on her temple. The immediate cause of death was not apparent, but the scene suggested foul play. The small community of Oakwood buzzed with shock and sorrow as news of the discovery spread. Melissa had been missing for 48 hours, and her friends and family had clung to hope that she would return unharmed. Now that hope was cruelly dashed. James Porter was inconsolable, his grief magnified by the public scrutiny he now faced. He had been the one to report Melissa missing, and now he was thrust into the center of a murder investigation. Detective Sarah Davis arrived at the scene, her expression grim. She meticulously inspected the car and the surrounding area, noting the lack of defensive wounds on Melissa's body and the absence of a struggle. This suggested she might have been unconscious or incapacitated before her death. A preliminary examination revealed traces of a powdery substance on the passenger seat, which would later be identified as a potent sedative. Davis ordered the car to be towed to the forensic lab for a thorough examination and instructed her team to canvass the area for witnesses. The investigation had just begun, but the pressure to find answers was immense. The community wanted justice for Melissa, and the police were determined to provide it. The Oakwood Police Department quickly mobilized to investigate Melissa Porter's death. Detective Davis spearheaded the effort, her no-nonsense attitude setting the tone for the team. The first order of business was to question James Porter, whose proximity to the victim made him an initial person of interest. James was brought in for questioning at the station. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Detective Davis began with routine questions about his relationship with Melissa, their recent activities, and his whereabouts during the time she was missing. James explained that he and Melissa had been married for 5 years, a seemingly happy couple in the eyes of the community. He recounted the night Melissa disappeared. She had left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she needed to run some errands. When she didn't return, he grew worried and called the police the next morning. Davis noted his demeanor, searching for signs of deception. James provided an alibi, stating he was home watching TV that night. He offered to let the police verify his story with their home security system's footage. Davis made a mental note to follow up on this lead. As the interview progressed, another name surfaced: Michael Reynolds. According to James, Michael was a close friend of Melissa's, someone she had known for years. James admitted he had always felt a bit uneasy about their relationship, but had no concrete reason to suspect anything untoward. Detective Davis decided to pay Michael a visit. Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with an air of easy confidence, welcomed the detectives into his home. He seemed genuinely distraught upon hearing of Melissa's death, insisting they had been just friends. However, his nervous fidgeting suggested there might be more to the story. The investigation widened to include Joe Clark, a local artist who had been seen with Melissa on numerous occasions. Joe, in his mid-40s, was known for his brooding temperament and reclusive lifestyle. He was less forthcoming than Michael, evading direct questions and offering vague, cryptic responses. Detective Davis sensed that both Michael and Joe were hiding something. The threads of Melissa's life began to unravel, revealing a woman who was far more complex and enigmatic than anyone had realized. With each interview, the investigation grew more convoluted, and the stakes became higher. The truth about Melissa's death was buried beneath layers of secrets, and it was up to Davis to dig them out. Melissa Porter was born and raised in Oakwood, a town she loved and never wanted to leave. She was known for her warm smile and her ability to connect with people, traits that made her an excellent kindergarten teacher. Her marriage to James was seen as a match made in heaven, though those closest to her knew there was more beneath the surface. Melissa met James at a charity event 5 years ago. James, an accountant with a stable job and a kind heart, seemed like the perfect partner. They married within a year, and for a while their life together appeared idyllic. But over time, Melissa began to feel restless. The routine of married life left her yearning for something more. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael and Melissa had been friends since high school. Their bond had always been strong, and there were times when their friendship seemed to border on something deeper. Michael, a charming and successful entrepreneur, offered Melissa the excitement and passion she felt was missing from her marriage. Their relationship, while initially platonic, soon evolved into a secret affair. Melissa found herself torn between the security James provided and the thrill she experienced with Michael. Her feelings for Michael were intense, but they also brought complications and guilt. Then there was Joe Clark. Joe was a local artist, known for his moody paintings and reclusive nature. Melissa met Joe at an art exhibition a year before her death. Joe was different from both James and Michael. He was mysterious and brooding, qualities that fascinated Melissa. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before Melissa found herself involved with Joe as well. Melissa's relationships with Michael and Joe were known only to a few close friends, and she took great pains to keep them hidden from James. However, managing these affairs became increasingly difficult, and Melissa's life grew more complicated. She loved each of these men in different ways, and each offered her something unique. But she also knew that this web of love and deceit could not last forever. As Detective Davis delved deeper into Melissa's background, she discovered a woman who was passionate and vibrant but also deeply conflicted. Melissa's need for connection and excitement had led her down a dangerous path, one that ultimately ended in her untimely death. With Melissa's body discovered and her secret life beginning to surface, suspicion naturally fell on James Porter. Detective Davis scrutinized his alibi, seeking any inconsistencies that might indicate his involvement in his wife's death. James's alibi rested on his claim that he was at home the night Melissa disappeared, watching TV and later falling asleep on the couch. The home security footage confirmed that James had not left the house during the critical hours. However, Davis was not entirely convinced. She knew that alibis could be fabricated or manipulated. The state of the Porters' marriage became a focal point of the investigation. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a couple that appeared happy, but had their share of issues. Financial records showed that the Porters were struggling with debt, a potential motive for James to want his wife out of the picture. Life insurance policies on Melissa further added to the suspicion. Though the amounts were not exorbitant, James's demeanor during questioning was another point of concern. While his grief seemed genuine, there were moments when his responses were too measured, too controlled. Davis wondered if he was hiding something, or simply trying to protect himself from being wrongfully accused. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between James and Melissa in the days leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed growing tension between them, with Melissa expressing dissatisfaction and James responding with frustration. The arguments, though not overtly violent, indicated a marriage under significant strain. James's interactions with Michael and Joe also raised red flags. Both men admitted to having confrontations with James, who had become increasingly suspicious of their relationships with Melissa. James denied any knowledge of Melissa's affairs, but his anger towards the men was palpable. As the investigation progressed, James Porter remained a prime suspect. His potential motives, financial gain, marital discord, and jealousy, provided enough cause for Detective Davis to keep a close watch on him. However, without concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, the case against him remained circumstantial. Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, the two men who had shared intimate relationships with Melissa, were next on Detective Davis's list. Each had their own reasons for wanting Melissa in their lives, and potentially reasons for wanting her gone. Michael Reynolds, with his charismatic demeanor and successful career, seemed an unlikely suspect at first glance. He had been Melissa's confidant for years, their bond evolving into a romantic relationship that brought both joy and complications. Michael's feelings for Melissa were genuine, but his frustration with her indecision and the secrecy of their affair had caused tension. During questioning, Michael admitted to feeling hurt and betrayed when he discovered Melissa's involvement with Joe, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. Joe Clark was a different story. Known for his brooding personality and artistic temperament, Joe had always been somewhat of an enigma. His relationship with Melissa was intense and passionate, but also fraught with jealousy and possessiveness. Joe's art often reflected his tumultuous emotions, and his interactions with Melissa had been no exception. During his interview, Joe was evasive, his answers tinged with bitterness. He expressed deep sorrow over Melissa's death, but also a lingering resentment towards her for being unable to fully commit to him. Davis noted the contrasts between Michael and Joe. One a polished, successful businessman, the other a moody, introspective artist. Both had motives driven by love and jealousy, and both had been deeply affected by Melissa's actions. The detective also discovered that Michael and Joe had confronted each other on several occasions, their arguments escalating as Melissa's relationships with them became more entangled. The investigation into Michael and Joe's backgrounds revealed more layers to Melissa's story. Each man had been drawn to Melissa's vivacious personality and warmth, but both had also experienced the darker sides of their relationships with her. The complexity of these relationships suggested that Melissa's death was not a straightforward case of jealousy or revenge, but rather a culmination of many conflicting emotions and desires. As Detective Davis continued to unravel the intricacies of Melissa's life and relationships, she realized that the truth was buried deep within a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden motives. The challenge was to untangle these threads and find the one that would lead to Melissa's killer. As Detective Davis dug deeper into the lives of Melissa, James, Michael, and Joe, she began to uncover a series of startling revelations and secrets that painted a clearer picture of Melissa's complex world. The first major revelation came from Melissa's close friend, Laura Mitchell. Laura revealed that Melissa had been confiding in her for months about the struggles in her marriage and the turmoil caused by her relationships with Michael and Joe. Melissa had been feeling increasingly trapped and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of maintaining her marriage and managing her affairs. Laura also mentioned that Melissa had expressed fears about someone stalking her, though she never specified who. This new information prompted Davis to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes. The possibility of a third-party involvement, someone who knew about Melissa's affairs and had a vested interest in her demise, became a compelling angle. Davis ordered a deeper investigation into Melissa's communications and social media, looking for any signs of threats or suspicious activity. The forensic analysis of Melissa's car provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Traces of the sedative found in the passenger seat matched a prescription registered to Joe Clark. When confronted with this evidence, Joe's calm facade began to crack. He admitted to having the sedative, but claimed he had no intention of harming Melissa. According to Joe, Melissa had asked him for the sedative to help her sleep, a claim that was difficult to verify. Further complicating the investigation was a discovery in Michael's financial records. Large sums of money had been transferred between Michael's accounts and an unknown third party over the past few months. Michael explained that these were business transactions, but the lack of clear documentation raised suspicion. Davis wondered if Michael might have been involved in some form of blackmail or had hired someone to intimidate Melissa. The pressure on all three men intensified as Davis continued to piece together Melissa's last days. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed that Melissa had been planning to leave Oakwood, possibly to escape the tangled relationships she had found herself in. She had been seen packing boxes into her car and had mentioned to a colleague that she needed a fresh start. Then came the biggest revelation of all: a hidden journal found in Melissa's belongings. The journal contained detailed accounts of her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, as well as her fears and plans for the future. Melissa wrote about feeling suffocated by James's controlling nature, exhilarated by her affair with Michael, and deeply conflicted about her intense connection with Joe. She also mentioned receiving anonymous threats, which she suspected were from someone who knew about her affairs. The journal painted a picture of a woman caught in a web of her own making, desperate to break free but unsure how. It provided Detective Davis with critical insights into Melissa's state of mind and the potential motives of those around her. With this new evidence, Davis felt she was finally closing in on the truth. Just as Detective Davis thought she was getting closer to solving the case, a surprising twist emerged that shifted the focus of the investigation. A new piece of evidence surfaced: a security camera recording from a nearby convenience store that showed Melissa in the company of a man who was neither James, Michael, nor Joe on the night she disappeared. The man in the footage was identified as Daniel Harper, a former colleague of Melissa's from a previous job in a neighboring town. Harper had a checkered past, including a history of violent behavior and a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. The discovery of his involvement with Melissa added a new layer of complexity to the case. Davis brought Harper in for questioning. Harper, a wiry man with a nervous energy, initially denied having seen Melissa recently. However, when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. He admitted to meeting Melissa that night, but claimed they had only talked. According to Harper, Melissa had reached out to him because she felt threatened and needed someone to confide in. She had asked Harper to meet her away from Oakwood to avoid being seen by anyone who might know her. Harper's account seemed plausible, but Davis was wary. Harper had a motive: his unrequited feelings for Melissa and his jealousy over her relationships with other men. His past behavior suggested he could be capable of violence, especially if he felt rejected or betrayed. Davis decided to dig deeper into Harper's background and his interactions with Melissa. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Harper's car revealed traces of the same sedative found in Melissa's vehicle. This new evidence linked Harper directly to the scene of the crime, making him a prime suspect. Harper's story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. He confessed that he had given Melissa the sedative, but insisted it was for her own protection, claiming she had asked for it to calm her nerves. Detective Davis knew that Harper's involvement complicated the narrative, but she also suspected there was more to the story. Harper's account of events didn't entirely align with the evidence. Davis hypothesized that Harper might have been manipulated by someone else, possibly Michael or Joe, to carry out the crime. The idea of a larger conspiracy began to take shape. As Davis continued to press Harper for details, he revealed a startling detail: he had been receiving anonymous payments over the past few months, just like Michael. Harper claimed he didn't know who was behind the payments, but admitted they were meant to ensure his silence about his meetings with Melissa. This revelation pointed to a coordinated effort to keep Melissa's secrets hidden. Davis realized that the investigation had taken a dark turn, one that involved not just a crime of passion, but a calculated plan to silence Melissa permanently. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and Davis was determined to uncover the mastermind behind the plot. The investigation took a sinister turn as Detective Davis unraveled the web of deception surrounding Melissa's death. The revelation of anonymous payments and Harper's involvement hinted at a larger, more nefarious plot. Davis now had to consider the possibility that Melissa's death was not just a crime of passion, but a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Davis's team focused on tracing the source of the payments. Financial records showed a series of transactions funneled through a shell company, eventually leading to an offshore account. The intricate financial trail suggested a high level of planning and resourcefulness, characteristics not typically associated with crimes of passion. This new lead pointed towards someone with significant financial acumen and the means to cover their tracks, potentially Michael Reynolds, given his business background. Davis revisited Michael, armed with the new evidence. Under intense questioning, Michael's confident facade began to crack. He admitted to transferring money to Harper, but insisted it was to help Melissa, not harm her. He claimed Melissa had confided in him about her fears and asked him to arrange for protection, but he had no idea Harper would misuse the funds. Davis was not convinced by Michael's explanation. She suspected that Michael, feeling cornered by Melissa's indecision and the threat of their affair being exposed, had orchestrated a plan to remove her from the equation. However, Michael alone could not have executed such a complex scheme. The involvement of Joe Clark, with his volatile emotions and connection to Melissa, seemed likely. Confronting Joe, Davis presented the evidence of the sedative and the financial transactions. Joe, already unstable, broke down under the pressure. He confessed to being manipulated by Michael, who had convinced him that Melissa was planning to leave both of them and expose their affairs. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Joe agreed to Michael's plan to sedate Melissa and make her disappear. The dark truth emerged. Michael had orchestrated the entire plot, using Joe and Harper as pawns to carry out his plan. Michael's motive was not just jealousy, but a calculated decision to eliminate Melissa and protect his reputation and business interests. Joe, driven by his emotional turmoil, had been an unwitting accomplice, and Harper, lured by money, had played his part without fully understanding the consequences. Davis's investigation had uncovered a chilling conspiracy that highlighted the lengths people would go to protect their secrets and desires. The case was far more complex and darker than anyone had initially imagined, revealing the depths of human deceit and treachery. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Detective Davis moved swiftly to secure arrest warrants for Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Financial transactions, confessions, and the forensic link between the sedative and Joe. Davis coordinated with her team to ensure that the arrests were conducted smoothly and without incident. Joe Clark was the first to be apprehended. He was found at his studio, surrounded by his hauntingly dark paintings. The arresting officers found him in a state of disarray, his guilt and regret evident. Joe offered no resistance, murmuring apologies and asking about Melissa's final moments. His remorse was genuine, but it could not absolve him of his role in the crime. Michael Reynolds proved more challenging. He had anticipated the arrest and attempted to flee. However, a coordinated effort by the Oakwood Police Department ensured he was apprehended at a private airstrip, trying to board a chartered plane. His arrest was marked by defiance and indignation, maintaining his innocence and accusing the police of fabricating evidence. With both suspects in custody, the prosecution began to build a robust case. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Oakwood's history, drawing intense media attention. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and those who had known Melissa. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, while the defense tried to paint Michael as a victim of circumstance and Joe as a man driven to desperation. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the extensive evidence and emotional testimonies. Ultimately, both Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree murder. Michael received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Joe, whose genuine remorse and cooperation were considered, was given a reduced sentence of 25 years. Daniel Harper, whose role was more peripheral, was charged with accessory to murder and received a lesser sentence of 10 years. His involvement, though significant, was viewed as being coerced by the primary conspirators. In the end, Oakwood returned to its peaceful existence, but the memory of Melissa Porter and the lessons learned from her case would never be forgotten. Her story remained a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice.